Alrighty, welcome to a special video today. I am, of course, joined by Andrew BK Beckstrom here. As you can see by his accolades, he's the winner of multiple 64-player cube drafts, among other very talented things, I'm sure. We're going to go over Modern Horizons for Cube. We're going to put each card in a tier list here. And BK, why don't you go ahead and explain the tier list we're looking at?
Yeah, so we're mostly going to be talking about this in the context of Vintage Cube, and we've got a rating system to break down how likely we think these MH3 cards are to make an impact on the format. And whether that we're talking about the Magic Online Vintage Cube or, Luis, you maintain your own version of it. And so if these cards are going to be ranging from S tier, which is broken, we think these are, among the best of the best. That doesn't necessarily mean we think it's an S tier quite. Like, we're not saying this card is as good as Black Lotus or a Moxen or something if it's in there. And then dropping down the ratings, let's
give a little example too. Like, for example, from a recent set, Orcish Bowmasters would clearly be in the S tier. Like, it's anything in the top like 30 or so cards in the cube or in that range, I would consider S tier, where it's just a busted card. Minsk and Boo, Bowmasters, Fourth Year Lingus, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then dropping down to likely cube staple, we're talking about, something like Vaultborn Tyrant is now, I would consider, a cube staple and maybe not quite broken. B, a card that could be good. Maybe if we were doing this before the last set, Nathan Sawyer's Invitational card, Duelist of the Mind. And then dropping down to C, this is a little bit more of a niche category. We're going to be dropping in cards here, the ones that we think has potential but needs cube changes. And so if it's something which, really requires a lot of like flicker effects to be good, or maybe a lot more colorless mana to be added, that's where you can expect those kind of cards to appear.
Right, like Yawgmoth Thran Physician is a pretty good example of like, this card's clearly good enough if it's supported. Most cube lists don't quite support it.
Right. And then D, worst version of existing things. So maybe this card is a good, efficient rate, but maybe, it's like the sixth best green 3-drop beater that you can find in Magic. And so at that point, that's not really the kind of thing that we're going to be looking to be playing with in Vintage Cube. It's not going to make much of an impact. And then F is just a card we think is not close to worth it. We're not going to be going over every card today. We've already culled down the multi-100 card set to just 100 cards. And for today, we're just looking at the MH3 cards in Pure. There's also the MH3 Commander set. But if folks like this, maybe we'll go through those ones as well.
All right, let's kick it off with Ajani Nakata Pariah. So you get on the front side a 1/2 and a 2/1 for 2 mana. And if the 2/1 dies, you transform Ajani into a Planeswalker, which has some cool effects too. I mean, this card seems very likely to be in the A category.
Yeah, it's just a good rate, right? For like that first part of the text, just that making a 1/2 and a 2/1 on a 2-drop. When we typically think of token makers, we're not getting as much stats. And I would say that there really haven't been very many cards in Cube which get to this good of a rate as far as 2-drop token makers go. And so this could open up some new cards being even better that key off your number of creatures. A card like Legion's Landing could make it back into the Cube because of how good this card is at putting down 2 bodies on turn 2.
Right, and the backside actually is a 3 loyalty Planeswalker for +2, puts a +1/+1 counter on all your cats. For 0, makes a 2/1 cat. And if you do control a red permanent other than Johnny, you also get to deal damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target. And the -4 makes everyone sack everything but one card of each type. So, but honestly, you didn't really need much to make a Johnny good. Like, the backside just has to have some relevance.
Right. And unlike some of the other ones we'll be seeing from this cycle, there's a cycle of these flip Planeswalkers. This one kind of asks the least of you. It talks about other cats you control dying, and so sure, it would be better technically if you had other cats, but this card just makes another cat on ETB.
Right. My camera was going nuts for a sec. Let's move on to Charitable Levy. So this is Raph Levy's invitational card. It's when you play against Raph Levy and he, decides to make an error for you to win the game. He's being a charitable Levy there. He's 1 and a white for an enchantment, and it makes all non-creature spells cost 1 more. And then the third time someone plays a non-creature spell, you sack this, draw a card, and get a Plains into play. So think of it as kind of like a disruptive element against an opponent playing a lot more spells than you, and it eventually gets you 2 cards out of it.
Yeah, the biggest upside of this card is that it's like a Thalia type effect that your opponent can't kill with most of the removal, I would say, but that also pairs with the fact that you're just not putting pressure on them. And normally when you're in that kind of dynamic, I feel like of I want to tax you, I value a lot more that I'm getting the game over with rather than when this all ends, I'm going to get something back. I would kind of think this is closer to D tier than something that I'm excited to be playing with or trying. How do you feel as somebody who this card is going to punish if it shows up?
Yeah, I think the fact that it doesn't put pressure on is its biggest downside, and you can kind of, post through it. You can just keep casting cards, and eventually it goes away. I think it's a solid card. I think it's probably like a D tier card. The one upside of this that I kind of like is you could imagine putting this in like a white mid-range deck and having it be like, because those kind of decks, like a white deck trying to play more expensive cards, they like drawing a card, they like getting a plane. So imagine putting this into like a deck with some sweepers, and it doesn't, isn't trying to get the game over with quickly, and this is just a good value speed bump that gets them 2 cards eventually.
Yeah, more like a big white deck with like Sarah Paragons and other big white value generating creatures. Yeah.
Moving on to Metastatic Evangel. It's 2 mana, 3/1, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. This, I think, pretty clearly falls into the C category of you could imagine this being really good. I would think that the current cube lists, you probably don't have quite enough ways to use it.
Yeah, Cube's not as much about Planeswalkers as it used to be. We can obviously start coming up with combos of cards that this is going to be kind of exciting with. You're walking ballistas, but is it just reliable enough? And because the floor is not very high of being a 2 mana 3/1.
Yeah, so kind of cool card, but my guess is doesn't quite make it. Ocelot Pride is nice. 1 mana for a first strike lifelink 1/1. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life, you make a 1/1 cat. Then if you have the city's blessing, so if you've ever had over the course of the game 10 or more permanents, you make another token. You make a token for each token you've already made this turn. So by itself, of course, it makes 2 1/1s. But if you're making other tokens, like it can kind of go nuts. I'm just looking at 1 mana 1/1 first strike lifelink. You just play this on turn 1. Turn 2, you almost always get to attack, and you make another 1/1. Like at that point, we're talking Usher of the Fallen type cards that offers a kind of high upside in the late game.
Yeah, and it compares to Usher unfavorably in that it's not a 2/1 for 1, but it sure does compare favorably in the sense of you don't have to spend mana of it. And when we're talking about Vintage Cube, every mana is taxed so much. I'm pretty into this card, and I think it's overall better for Usher. I mean, if you ever get to actually do the thing where you're copying other types of tokens, that's pretty insane.
Yeah, I'm gonna want to try this in my cube, and I'm probably gonna add Legion's Landing back in as well, because those cards work kind of nicely together. I could see this being the sort of thing where white has like a minor theme here, but my guess is this slots in as like a B. Like, this looks pretty good to me.
Yep.
Felia Exuberant Shepherd, the wild dog here. 2 mana 2/2 flash, and when you play it, or when it attacks, you exile another non-land permanent, and then that permanent comes back under its owner's control. But if it entered under your control, you get a +1/+1 counter on Felia. So kind of the gameplay here is end of their turn, you like play this, and then you attack, and it does some cool stuff. It can exile a blocker. So imagine that you're playing White Weenie, and you go 1-drop, they play a 2-drop, you go end of turn, flash this in, attack with both, play another creature. It's just kind of like a 2/2 for 2 that makes it so one of their creatures can't block. But it can also blink your own stuff, and then it starts to grow as well. So it's kind of a versatile card. It kind of fits into like Flicker Wisp, Samwise, Blink type stuff fairly well, and does seem like it does a pretty good job of putting on the pressure. If you play this end of turn, your opponent is down basically 2 blockers because this gets in and the creature it exiles can't block. So it could add a lot of pressure in that sense.
Yeah, this card looks similar to other things, but the amount of stuff it does is so much more. Like it's like, for instance, it's not just creatures, it's non-land permanents. So there's all sorts of options that's going to open up for you in terms of what you can blink out now. Anything with a good ETB, your artifacts, your enchantments.
This also just eats their tokens.
Yeah, and it grows bigger when it's blinking your own stuff. And so the fact that it's one of the biggest downsides to blink cards is that they tend to be kind of low rate when you don't have positive stuff of yourself to blink. But when you just look at this card as like 2 mana flash 2/2, your opponent is always down a blocker, Okay, that's a pretty high floor for my card being off.
I mean, imagine you go like one drop, they play a land, you go attack, they play another land, play whatever. You go end of turn, play this, play a creature, attack, blink my own creature, and then this is just basically a 2-mana 3/3. Like, even if you're not getting any value out of that. So this looks closer to an A than a B to me, but it's somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think it's an A card. I would rather play with this card than a Johnny. I always just value like the ability to be tricksy and interact with my opponents more than just being slightly more aggressive and beatdowny.
So here we've got one of many kinds of cards. We're actually going to have to make some decisions here because there's a ton of new MDFC, Modal double-faced cards that are land/spells, Razorgrass Ambush. So all of the monocolored ones, they enter untapped if you pay 3 life or enter tapped otherwise. And, like this one is just 2 mana, deal 3 to an attacking or blocking creature. The reason I say we have to make some decisions is because I don't think I want to put all of the cards in, but they're pretty much all plausible for Cube. Like a blue-white control deck or a white weenie deck would both be very happy with this card.
Yeah, for a lot of them, there's this sort of tier of I would play it basically every time I had it, but I wouldn't draft it much. And I think this one is pretty close to that. It's kind of nice that some of the downside risk of this card of like paying 3 life being a taxing thing, well, that's when the spell mode of this is the most useful.
Yeah, when you're playing against an aggressive deck, you're probably just not playing this as a land very often.
And then if you're not playing against an aggressive deck, hey, I get an untapped land.
So I think all of these cards are like at least, in the like B, C range, some closer to A than others. I would say Razorgrass Ambush falls into the category which I'm not like super excited about, which is, yes, you'd always put it in your deck, but you wouldn't want to take it very highly. That's just an okay card. Like, I don't mind having some amount of those in the cube, but I also don't think I'm going to put in 20 of these cards. So there's got to be some picking and choosing here.
Yeah, to me, this one is like in the category of like, it's a D card. It's a worse version of existing things. Like,
it's just not that interesting.
You could have it in, but I don't know why you need to have more of this kind of thing.
So White Orchid Phantom is white for a 2/2 flying for a strike. Pretty good start in terms of combat stats. And when it ETBs, it Field of Ruins any non-basic land. You destroy a non-basic land, and its controller goes and gets a tapped basic. So you can target yourself if you have a reason to, but mostly this is just going to downgrade one of their non-basics into a basic, which that's a solid ability. You can take out a Mishra's Workshop, a Tellurian Academy, a Caracas, all those sorts of things. And you're not really paying a whole lot because white 2/2 flying first strike is a pretty aggressive little rate. This looks okay. Not incredible, but okay.
Yeah, I don't like costing white. I think there's just not a ton of upside at any part of this card outside of the fact that it is about as good in combat as you're going to get in the early game, where it's going to be a very effective attacker and also a very effective blocker. It's just not reliably messing with your opponent's mana. The fact that they can get any basic land means they're at least going to have one of the colors you blew up.
Yeah, I think in Cube, people still almost always have at least 5 basics, if not like way more than that. So it's not like you're running them out of basics. Like in Modern, you play 3 of these in a game, maybe you've run them out. So I would say White Orchid Phantom probably gets like a D. Like it's not quite there.
Yeah.
Witch Enchanter. So this is another one of the MDFCs. So it's a 4-mana 2/2 Reclamation Sage or a land. And this looks like one of the better ones. Like I think that you'd be pretty happy to have this card in most of your decks. Like this looks like a B level card to me, and likely going to slot in as one of the mono white versions of this effect, just because having a disenchant effect on a body is pretty strong. Like you can imagine casting this and being pretty happy, and getting to put it as a land when they don't have a good target is like exactly what you want out of this kind of card.
Yeah, really good with Felia.
Yeah, great to blink.
Yeah, super high upside card, and it's nice for a double-sided card that you're going to feel pretty confident when you play this as a land that it's like, yeah, they're just not playing artifacts and enchantments this game.
And the other thing is like Razorgrass Ambush, when you cast it, you just like feel okay about it. It's like it did the thing. This, you feel pretty good when you play this and blow up like one of their cards. Like it actually feels like you're getting somewhere.
Right.
Wrath of the Skies. So this is an energy card, and that's always a tricky subject because you can support energy. And in this one, so this is X white, you get X energy and then pay that much energy to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with a cost less equal to or less than the amount of energy you paid. This is self-contained. You could put this card and 0 other energy cards in the cube and it would basically work. It's like you're kind of casting an engineered explosives for X or less. It obviously does get quite a bit better if you have other energy sources. So by itself, I think this probably isn't quite good enough, but I'm curious if you think that it kind of stands on its own.
I think that the part that makes this card interesting is that it hits artifacts. And artifact tokens and just go wide with artifacts is such a big part of modern day Vintage Cube that I could imagine this card being at least good enough at doing the wrathing of the others. That's like against small creature decks. Like if you pay 4 mana, you're gonna get to, and you have no other energy sources, you do get to kill all the 2-drops or less. It's definitely a very speculative card, but there's honestly not many cards in the cube right now which are actively quite strong against the artifact decks, but still versatile and flexibly good against other things. So that's what makes me potentially intrigued by this card.
Yeah, I think this is probably not quite good enough, but it opens the door also to maybe having an energy package. That's going to be like a C level sort of thing where if you wanted to put in 20 energy cards, you maybe could. There's a lot of powerful ones in the set. My guess is that's not where I would go immediately. Brain Surge is cool. It's a 3 mana Brainstorm for 4. So it's a lot worse than Brainstorm on rate. You're paying an extra 2 mana to draw an extra 1 card, but still 3 mana to draw 4 cards and put 2 back. There's some combos with that. You can set up some things, and it's like a pretty decent just card draw spell in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's net +2 cards, and we're basically at a point now where there just are no divinations left in the cube.
Yeah.
You could just get more cards for less mana. It's the Brainstorm effect is so nice because while it's secretly a 1 mana
it's
card,
net +1 card, by the way. Like,
what?
It's net +1 in terms of card advantage. You're casting this and you're ending up with 1 more card in your hand. You do get to at least keep 2 of the 4. But
that's why I'm comparing it to a divination,
exactly.
right?
Which is net +1, but
right.
We just want to be
for
precise here.
Okay. Now Brainstorm, you cost 1, but it's in a lot of ways it's like a secret 2-drop that can kind of get split over turns where you get to like do it on their end step and then upkeep, cycle a basic one of the land cyclers to shuffle, or you play it and then you have a fetch land that turn. The fact that to do those sorts of combos with Brain Surge is getting us up into the 4 mana range in terms of how much this kind of experience is costing us. I don't know. I get it. Who doesn't want to play with Brainstorm more? Who doesn't want a more powerful Brainstorm? But I'm dubious that this is one of the better. This is a actually actively good thing you could be doing once we're in that 3-4 mana range.
Yeah, I think just in the state of Vintage Cube right now, when you pay 3 mana for an effect or a spell or a creature, you kind of expect to have a good effect on the game as it's being played right then. Kite Sail Larcenist, True Name Nemesis, that sort of thing. Brain Surge seems like it's a little beyond the times. 10 years ago, this would have been a windmill slam in the cube. Right now, it's probably something like a D, like a worse version of most existing things. But it could be interesting. My guess is it's not quite there. Consigned to Memory is a funny one. So 1 blue to counter target triggered ability or colorless spell, and it has Replicate. The joke here, of course, is that against an Eldrazi, they cast an Emrakul, and you're like, counter the Emrakul. Well, Emrakul itself can't be countered. Let's say Ulamog. Counter the Ulamog, counter the trigger. But it also is just an anti-artifact card. You play this against an artifact deck, and it's a 1 mana counter target artifact. Like that's generally pretty good. Though I guess some artifacts get around it. You can't counter Kappa Cannoneer with this one. So
you could also use this stuff proactively with your own with a Lotus Field, for instance.
Mm-hmm. You could, so we had Tail's End and Stifle in the cube for a bit, sometimes with Dreadnought, Phyrexian Dreadnought, but that ended up not being good enough. Tail's End lasted a little longer. I think Consign is likely in the C to D range of not quite worth it, but it has some interesting elements to it. If I wanted to expand the cube to have more sideboard cards, I think this card would be pretty strong. It is possible that as Stifle / counter an artifact split card, it's there. You can counter a fetch land, you can counter. Oh no, this doesn't counter fetch lands. It's only triggered abilities, not activated.
Just triggered.
Yeah, I'm pretty off this card then. Actually, I think this card is probably too narrow. It would be good in the sideboard expansion of the cube, but I haven't quite gone down that road yet. Taking a look, Emrakul's Messenger is a 2-mana 2/1 flying. It has no color, and whenever you draw your second card each turn, you make an 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that you can sack for a colorless. So a 2-mana 2/1 flying, and every cantrip or card draw spell that you play, once per turn makes you an 0/1. Yeah, I mean this card it's kind of pushing on the like blue aggro deck that doesn't really always get there, but I have like 2-mana 2/1 flyer as like kind of a baseline.
Yeah, it does combine nicely with some of the other aggressive blue cards, your Ledger Shredders or Malcolms.
It's good with
for
Skull
being.
Clamp.
Oh wow, that is a really nice combo. Yeah. And giving you extra mana is pretty cool. Like a lot of times when we have these sort of blue key off of extra card draws, they might be doing something more finicky. The fact that this is giving you chump blockers or potentially mana acceleration allows you to kind of be able to play multiple games where you're both attacking in the air and then also setting up something down the road.
Yeah. I think this has potential, but not is like a C-level card. Like not it would need like I would need to see some other stuff that maybe goes along with it, though Skull Clamp is pretty exciting. Flare of Denial. So there's a cycle of these that all let you sack a non-token creature of their color to cast them for free. So it's 1 blue counterspell, but you can sack a blue creature to play this for free. I do think this card will probably be good in kind of a similar deck to what we're talking about, though funnily enough, you can't sack the emissary to this because it's colorless, it's devoid.
Yeah.
Really well done there, guys. I do think that a blue-red aggro deck that has a bunch of blue creatures in it would probably be interested in this. I don't know, imagine you're like Malcolm Dragon Rage Channeler deck that sometimes just cast this as cancel, but in a pinch you can just sack your Malcolm or sack your, I guess sacking True Name is pretty bad. Snack your Snapcaster Mage, there we go. Snapcaster's a good one to sacrifice.
Yeah, if we Baleful Strix.
Ooh, Baleful Strix, that's a great one.
There's some combos out there, but yeah, I think it's particularly nice in the blue artifact decks because those tend to just be playing with like a bunch of blue creatures whose time may or may not be here. They do oftentimes care about countering a key spell or making a key spell of theirs resolve. It's such an interesting card because it feels like it should be for fair decks, but I almost feel like it's better in any unfair strategy where you just are willing to throw away some resources in order to make sure one thing does or doesn't happen in the game. In a fair deck, it's pretty taxing to sack a blue non-token creature.
Yeah, this one looks like a B to me. This looks like it could be good. I would want to try it. This one I don't like. Harbinger of the Seas is a 1 blue for a 2/2. It's a Magus of the Islands. It turns all non-basic lands into islands. A, I don't think this is going to work very well, and B, when it does, I don't think it'll be that fun. So I'm not super into this. This looks like an F to me, honestly. Like they've had Magus of the Moon in the cube before, and it just really did not do anything.
Have you considered the fact that you could put this card in your very greedy Tolarian Academy deck with only like 6 artifacts, and then it could tap for blue?
Wow, great combo. Let's move on. Hydroelectric Specimen. This is another one of the flip cards, so it's a untapped island untapped land if you pay 3 life, or just a tapped blue land. It's also 2 blue for a 1/4 flash, and when it ETBs, you can change the target of target instant or sorcery spell with a single target to Hydroelectric Specimen. So mostly what this will do is just make them it counters a removal spell. Like they try to kill one of your things and you just cast this. I guess if the stars aligned, it could steal a positive effect, but do we even have any sort of card like that in the cube? I don't even think there is.
Not in ours. There's mutagenic growth in the Moto cube right now.
So this looks like it's not close to worth it to me because there's just going to be so much competition for like the medium effect double face land cards. It does have some interesting gameplay, but I would have loved to see a way to make this into like upside. I guess if they cast a bolt and you cast this, it counters the bolt and it stays alive. That's kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, and once in a while, just having a 3-mana 1/4 flash body will be really good against somebody's, Ragavan or whatever. But yeah, this is not very reliable, and I agree with you that this is not worth it for the extra 3 life.
Shadow of the Second Sun. This text box is just outrageous. I mostly think that we should just talk about this to talk about the text box. It's an enchantment for 4 blue. It enchants a player at the beginning of enchanted player's post-combat main phase. There's an additional beginning phase after this phase.
Yeah, the closest I've come to is that this is like a Prophet of Kruthix, a Seedborn Muse, where you're like getting to untap and you're getting like an extra draw because you don't get to like play your spells after this. So you're getting like flat mana for instance again, and you're getting an extra card for 6 mana.
It's a 6 mana Wilderness Reclamation that draws you a card, but also it's confusing, and not only because the text box is, I think this is an F. It's just way too expensive for what you get here.
Yeah.
Sink into Stupor. This one also looks quite good. This is 1 blue instant. It returns a spell or non-land permanent our opponent controls to their hand, but it's also a land. Like, this is kind of like a Venser type effect, or unsubstantiate, I guess, right? That was what that one did. But also a land. So it's kind of a bad rate, but like it's a really good way for a combo deck to get a little bit of disruption in. It's a way for a control deck to just kind of cover its bases and be able to bounce, I don't know, a planeswalker or an enchantment or something that they're maybe not that equipped to deal with. This one looks like it's pretty interesting and pretty good. This one I do want to try.
There's so many games of Modern Magic now that come down to who used their mana more efficiently, rather than the number of cards in hand. And any game that's going on and people are playing card effects that cost, a decent amount of mana, getting to return a 4, 5, 6, 7 drop that somebody's invested so much work into for 3 mana is just a crazy good exchange for you. So it's not always going to be great, but the fact that it's a land the rest of the time is amazing.
Yeah, this looks like a B. Definitely want to try it. So Tamiyo is another one of the planeswalkers. So it's blue for an 0/3 flyer. When it attacks, you make a clue, and when you draw your third card in a turn, you flip her. So basically, when you're looking at Tamiyo here, the other side is +2, that whenever a creature attacks a planeswalker, you or a planeswalker you control gets -1/-0. -3 to return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, and if it's green, you add a mana. And then -7, you draw half your deck. So there is definitely some pretty good stuff on the backside, but also 1 mana for an 0/3 that attacks and makes a clue. That is just not that bad. Like, this already dunks on hard evidence, which is often in Cube, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And 3 cards a turn is deceptively much easier than you think. Like, if we just play this on turn 1, do whatever we want to do on turn 2, and then on turn 3 we have to have a cantrip plus just crack one of the clues we've made. We've got a planeswalker, and it'll come down as 2 loyalty and immediately go up to 4.
1 mana.
What's up?
Play this turn 1. Next turn attack, make a clue. Next turn attack, make a clue. Tap your Tolarian Academy and crack both clues.
Incredible stuff.
We've done it. Actually, if you have an Academy out, I don't even know if you want to flip this thing.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Tamiyo does some good stuff here. I think that Tamiyo looks awesome. Like, also, it does something I've really wanted, which is get cheaper blue creatures into the cube. I've just wanted there to be better 1 and 2 mana plays for blue. It's just kind of got a glut at 3, and Tamiyo looks like a pretty sweet way to do that.
This also looks like one of the better cards with Flare of Denial, where you get to attack with this, make a couple of clues, and then just sack and get a free counter spell. So just does a lot of stuff.
Very much.
You want to put this up to A?
I'll start Tamiyo on the A tier. We'll do that.
All right.
Ugin's Binding, 2 and a blue instant. It's devoid for whatever that's worth, very little. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and like kind of Kozilek's Return, if you remember that one, whenever you cast a colorless spell with 7 mana or greater, you can exile this from your graveyard, and it bounces all their non-land permanents. This falls firmly into the C camp for me, which is I could definitely believe a cube where this card is awesome, but you would want like an Eldrazi package, I think, because otherwise there's just not that enough cards that are actually going to trigger this. Because Emrakul and Ulamog go into decks, but you're not casting them very often, and we don't have like All is Dust in the cube, like I guess maybe a Ballista for 4 or something, but I feel like in the current versions of cube this would basically never trigger, even though it is clearly a powerful effect.
Yeah, it is nice that you can loot and get it, but I think you just need to have more stuff than we currently have to make it reliable.
Boggart Trawler, 3 mana, 3/1, ETB exiles target player's graveyard, and it's got a land on the other side. Yeah, this looks okay, but looks pretty mid. Like, most of the time, exiling at sorcery speed does not even quite stop the thing you want to stop, because a lot of the animate decks will just do it in one turn or end of turn do it. And casting it as a 3/1 just to put a body into play is kind of mediocre. So this looks like one of the double face lands that you kind of have to consider all of them, because it's such a powerful ability to be a land as well as a spell. But this one doesn't look very satisfying.
It's funny. This card is kind of a C tier card in that if we were to make a lot of changes to the cube to make graveyards more relevant for other people beyond just the reanimator people, which is a thing we could do,
Definitely.
then this card would get more exciting. So it's like you need to build around this card by making other people's have more graveyard stuff. But otherwise, this is, it's C or F. Just
Crabomination, 4 black for a 5/5. It has Emerge from Artifact, 5 black, so you can sack an artifact to reduce its cost by the cost of that artifact's value. So imagine you sack a Basalt Monolith. That's a great combo with this. This only costs 4 mana to cast. The Basalt Monolith even pays for 2 of that, because it still costs the 2 black. And when it enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your opponent's library, a card at random from their graveyard, a card at random from their hand, and you get to cast one of those cards for free. Just one of them, but you get a card at random from their hand, random from their graveyard, and the top card of their deck. So you have a selection of 3 cards, probably at least hit one reasonable card, and they're also down a card. Like they get a card out of their hand randomly gone. Plus it's a 5/5. This card looks really sweet and is doing something pretty different for the artifact decks. It's a double black card. You want to sack a chunky artifact. It's unfortunately not an artifact itself, so you can't cast it with Mishra's Workshop, but Turn 1 Coalition Relic is just casting this on turn 2, right? No, you're 1 short. If you play Mishra's Workshop on turn 1 for Coalition Relic, that doesn't quite do it. But still, I can imagine this card being pretty castable. I mean, if you sack a 2 mana artifact, you're paying 5 mana for this. Like, it's a pretty strong effect. You're getting a 5/5 plus conservatively a 3 or 4 mana card that you're playing for free, and sometimes much greater.
also, it's kind of expectation breaking. I believe all the Emerge cards we saw before that had abilities were cast abilities. This is just ETB, so this card just also works with any kind of reanimation effect.
Oh yeah, I mean it's just 6 mana to just hard cast. I could definitely see putting this in just like a black-red reanimate deck that sometimes will animate it, but also sometimes will just cast a Dark Ritual and cast it or something.
Yeah, you want to go B tier?
Oh, I'm liking A tier on this. A cube staple. Look at this thing.
You just like messing with people too much. That's fine. A tier it is.
All right, we'll do it. Also one thing, if you sack a black artifact like a Necron Deathmark, it reduces the black cost as well.
Does it?
Yeah, paying the merge cost reduced by that artifact's mana value, right?
That wasn't how. I don't think that was how the Eldrazi. That wasn't like how Eldrazi
sorry,
worked.
I got confused by mana value. Never mind. That'll still just make it cost 2 though. In any case, Ethereum Terramander is a 1 mana 1/1 artifact creature, and anytime a cheap card, a cheap permanent is an artifact, you gotta pay attention, because let's just say Tolarian Academy and Urza and whatnot, they really subsidize cheap artifacts very nicely. 1 mana 1/1 flying, can only block flyers, and it adapts kind of like a Terramander, but its adapt cost is cheaper, so it costs 7 and gets 4 +1/+1 counters, but it costs 1 less for each other artifact you control. I could see this.
There's some good stuff here. The only blocking creatures with flying part really sucks.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest downside, because one mana 1/1 against a white weenie or a red opponent that just has some X1s that are trying to attack you is kind of nice. My guess is this doesn't get there. It's like a C-level card, because if you were to support this sort of thing, I could see like you play maybe like the Triarch Praetorian, the 1 in a black 2/1 flyer from Warhammer. You get more cheap black artifacts in there. This could be like a little part of an artifact aggro deck. I think it's a little bit too weak to play as is. Eviscerator's Insight is 1 in a black for It's kind of like one of the same effect we've seen a million times. It's instant. You have to pay an additional cost of sacking an artifact or creature, and you draw 2 cards. What is the upside? Instead of getting a treasure, instead of getting a map token, whatever, it's got flashback. That's kind of interesting. That's a pretty powerful upside.
Yeah, I think my experience has been is that you almost always, when you're doing artifact stuff, you want to just have your artifacts in play. It makes all of your cards better, so that makes me a little bit skeptical of this card. And I think it's just not doing enough.
I don't think this is good enough for Cube, but I think where I would want it is if Cube was supporting a black sacrifice theme more than an artifact theme. Like, imagine a cube that has Yawgmoth, Woestrider, other cheap creatures, Gravecrawler, that sort of thing, Bloodghast. This is the sort of card that could go nicely into that deck. But
you want to go F tier or D tier?
I would just say this is a D tier card, but it's got some potential. Fell to Profane. This one also looks fairly good. 2 black, instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, then you can play it as a land. So Hagra Mauling has never really been good enough, and that's basically this, except Hagra Mauling I don't think killed planeswalkers, and it came into play tapped always. This goes a long way in kind of having multiple upsides. I bet Fell to Profane is a card that will be interesting to play. Like, we've played a lot with Shatterskull Smashing, and the main reason it's actually not in my cube currently is because it's kind of bugged on Magic Online. It's got like a really bad UI kind of issues. Fell to Profane seems comparable to that. It seems like a card I would put in my deck a decent amount of the time. I guess black doesn't have a good pitch card that we're playing right now. Red has multiple of them. Like Fury and Pyrokinesis really make like spell lands a lot better. Black doesn't have that aspect, but this looks okay.
Well, maybe you'll be excited for the black pitch card in this set, because if you like killing creatures and planeswalkers.
Yeah. Well, I think Fell to Profane looks like I will try it, so it's probably like a B, like it could be good. It might be a little too bland. That's like the main thing, is like it's just not going to be that exciting to cast. Kurik, Son of Yawgmoth. This is actually a reprint. So we could have already had it in the cube. It's 4 and 3 Phyrexian mana for a 2/2, and 3 Phyrexian black mana, that is. So it's a 7 mana 2/2, but you can pay it for 4 mana and pay 6 life. It's got lifelink. It makes all your black mana symbols and your costs Phyrexian black. And whenever you cast a black spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter. There's some cool stuff this can do. I have considered it for cube. I have just felt like it's not quite there. So this looks like probably a D or a C, where it's like you could adjust the cube to maybe want this, but I don't think it's really like kind of pulling its weight right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, I did try to exclude all of the cards that were reprints. I guess I just have missed this one existing. So yeah, don't have anything more to say.
Marionette Apprentice, 1 and a black, 1/2 with Fabricate. So it either comes in as a 2/3, or more likely it comes in with a 1/1 servo. And whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, your opponent loses a life. Another little piece of the puzzle for like a low curve black artifact style deck, maybe with some sacrifice stuff. I think it's probably going to be a D, just because getting a 2/1 or a 1/2 plus a 1/1 is not quite good enough, even with like a decent-ish trigger. But I could see a world where this kind of thing is good.
Yeah, it's easy to underrate the life gain we typically see on a card like this.
Definitely.
And those life gains really go a long way when you're playing this sort of like trinkety type of strategy. And this one just missing it, yeah, I think is going to knock it down to D for me.
Ripples of Undeath is an enchantment for 1 and a black. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards. Then you can pay 1 colorless and 3 life. And if you do, you put a card from among those cards into your hand. So this has a pretty significant upside / drawback of it mills you for 3 a turn. Some decks can really make use of that. But I could also see cube games where it's like, okay, it's you play this on turn 2, the game lasts until turn 8, like you're at serious risk of decking yourself. It does some cool stuff, though. It's kind of like a Sylvan Library against a control deck or a deck that's not pressuring your life total. You get to pay 3 life, though costing a colorless as well is pretty rough. Where are you envisioning this? Like, what kind of deck do you think wants to play this?
A deck that has a bunch of cards currently not in the cube, your Hogaks and Vengevines, like cards like that.
Yeah, I think that is likely the case. So this looks like a card that needs some other support, but it would be powerful if there was that support. Sorin of House Markov. So that's another one of the flip planeswalkers. So it's 1 and a black for a 1/4 lifelink with extort. So you can pay 1 black or white mana. What color identity does this make this for commander? Never mind. I actually don't want to know. And it on itself, 2 mana, 1/4 lifelink extort, not crazy. Like, you probably wouldn't play that, but there's more to the card. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you get to flip Sorin, at which point he's got a 3 loyalty planeswalker, still has extort, +2 make a food, -1 deal damage equal to the amount of life you gain to any target, -6 gain control of any creature, becomes a vampire, and it also has lifelink counter. You put a lifelink counter if you control a white permanent other than that creature Sorin. That's kind of like a weird little set of things, but my inclination is this isn't quite there. Like, I guess the joke is you play this, you attack, you gain a life, and you play 2 cheap spells and extort twice, and then it flips. But even when it flips, it's not that powerful. Like, it makes foods, then it has -1, maybe kill something if you've spent some mana. So I think this one's going to be a miss for me, even though, like, it looks kind of like a D to me, even though most of the other flip planeswalkers are at least plausible.
Yeah, it's got decent stats and, like, lifelink 1/4, but we can usually just get more in cube, and I almost just want to drop it down even lower because it's a vampire that makes food, beings which canonically do not eat ever.
Oh, that's a really good point. Warren Soul Traders, 2 and a black for a 3/3 zombie goblin wizard. You can pay a life and sack a creature to make a treasure. This is another card that needs support that it currently doesn't have, but I mean, in the black Gravecrawler Bloodghast small token creature deck, this could do some things. It's a sacrifice outlet. I don't see this doing big things right now, though.
Yeah, this is just a C tier card, but I think it's there's so many powerful cards like Warren Soul Trader in this set that I think we'll have some fun in the coming months trying to retool the cube to bring back something, because getting the ability to just make a lot of mana with your Bloodghast, like, you play Bloodghast in a fetch land, like, that is a ton of potential mana you could be making off of a Bloodghast.
I mean, getting Bloodghast, Gravecrawler, Soul Trader, Yawgmoth, Hogak, the Mill enchantment Echoes of the Undeath that we just saw, like, there's definitely something there. We're not quite there yet, but that their potential is good. Okay, Amped Raptor. Are you amped for this? 1 and a red for a 2/1 first strike. When it ETBs, you get 2 energy counters, and then if you cast it from your hand, this is to stop chains, as you'll see, exile cards until you exile a non-land card, and then you can cast that card by paying energy equal to its mana value instead of paying its mana cost. So the joke with this, though, is it stops at the first non-land, and if that card costs more than the amount of energy you have, it just doesn't do anything. Like, the effect doesn't do anything. So this looks like a C to me. It's going to need more energy than this. I don't think that this would fit all that well in current cube.
Yeah, what do you think of calling this the Red Lurrus?
Yeah, I mean, if you play this card and you have all cheap cards and you can always hit, it's a good card, right? But I guess, like Lurrus, if we take it, people will say we're fools and we'll always lose. So
it also has 2 big downsides compared to Lurrus. First of all, it's not a companion. That's kind of big.
Yeah,
and then the other one is that it's not just looking at your permanents, it's looking at all your spells. So you can't, like, be cheeky and play a Fiery Confluence in your Lurrus deck. That's not going to work with Amped Raptor, assuming you have no other energy.
I would be amped for this if there was a lot of energy support. Clearly a powerful card, but as things currently stand, I'm not in. Ashling Flame Dancer, 2 red for a 4/4. You don't lose unspent red mana, and whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, discard a card, then draw a card. But if it's the second time that you've done this ability, Ashling deals 2 damage to each opponent and all their creatures. And if it's the third time, you add 4 red mana. Okay, so this is going down a different path of, can we put in some, like, Storm-ish spell support? And there are some other cards like this, or like in that category, that aren't in the cube, but it's pretty good with cards like Rite of Flame.
It sure is. Yeah, it does really pop. I mean, I do think that the amount that it pops is probably not worth it for a 4-drop, because it's not impactful the turn we play it, and you do. I feel like if it's not impactful the turn you play it and you need to end on top with it, It needs to be more game breaking than this is.
Yeah, I would say this is not close to worth it currently. This could also be a C where if you change the cube to around, it could be good. But my guess is this is closer to an F. Detective's Phoenix. Oh, good, a bestow card. 2 and a red for a 2/2 enchantment creature. It's got flying and haste. It also has bestow for 1 red mana and collect evidence 6. You can cast this as an enchantment that gives the creature +2/+2 flying and haste. And when the creature dies or gets bounced, this stays in play as a 2/2 flying haste. It's got 1 more ability. It's a Phoenix. You had to look for something like this. You can cast it from your graveyard for its bestow ability. This actually seems pretty strong. Like, in a red aggressive deck, you can cast this on turn 3 as a 2/2 flying haste. That's just okay. It's not that great. Sometimes you would do that. More likely, you would want to bestow this, but you can't really bestow it until you get evidence 6. So it's not an early game card, but in the middle to late game, it's really powerful. Like, imagine you bestow out of your graveyard, or you just bestow from your hand on a creature, and then that creature dies. Then they've got a 2/2 flyer. Then that dies. Then this comes back and it starts the chain. You kind of get 2 bites at the apple every time you bestow it, because it turns a creature into a big threat. And haste is also crazy. Like, imagine if this is in your graveyard, your opponent's just going to be worried that you're going to play a 4 or 5 mana creature and just haste it up, a hostile investigator or a bonehorde dragon or something. Like, this card's got some real good stuff going.
Yeah, and it just sort of stacks onto the amount of cards that can reward us for just looting in red now. You know, whether we're talking like your Voldaren Epicures, your Intis, Bloodtithe Harvester, Fable, Seasoned Pyromancer. It's not very hard to get up to collect evidence 6, especially if you're playing with some of the basic land cyclers from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, discard Oliphant plus this. Like, you're really talking. Your next play is going to be good. I like this. This looks like a B. Like, I'm just going to put this in and see how it does, basically. Like,
let's do it.
Dak Faden, turn 3, turn 4, play a 3-drop, equip this immediately.
Yeah, the fact that you get a 2/2 flyer in play when your bestowed thing dies is like a lot of insulation for you.
All right, Flare of Duplication. This is the red flare, so you can sack a non-token red creature to play it. It's 1 red instant, copy target instant or sorcery, and you can choose new targets. All right, I'll tell you this much. First of all, I'm probably going to put Fire Blast in the cube anyway. I've actually found it to lead to some pretty sweet game situations. Second, this card's really good with Fire Blast.
Yep, it sure is. That's 8 damage right to the face. And
for 1 mana?
I'm sure you'll find a way to throw... I look forward to watching you throw away a couple cards from your hand, a couple cards from in play to copy Pyrokinesis with this.
Yeah, I mean, exiling a card, sacking a creature, casting Pyrokinesis, casting this, you're down 4 cards, but they're probably down 5 creatures or something like that. Or, you know, you're not going to cast... Like, if you need a second Pyrokinesis, you're killing a bunch of stuff generally. I would slot this in for B. I think it's worth trying. Like, it seems like there's some stuff you can do. Very good with Lutri.
What?
You cast a spell.
Oh, you could copy. Okay,
and then you cast Lutri,
sure.
copy it. Then you sack the Lutri to copy it again. Like, I don't know.
All right. Yeah, that's true. There's one big aspect of the card we haven't talked about. It doesn't say you control. So
also true. Yes.
At a baseline, you could just if your opponent tries to counter a spell of yours, so you play something, they go Mana Drain or Force of Will or whatever, you can sack a red creature in play and have their counter spell, and make a counter spell targeting their counter spell. That's great stuff.
Yeah. Also, red just has more creatures to sacrifice to this, between like Dragon's Rage Channeler or Orcish Lumberjack or like the aforementioned Lutri, a Seasoned Pyromancer. I bet this card's pretty good. I'm excited to put this in. Frogmere Enforcer. So it's a Mirror Enforcer, 7 mana, 4/4 affinity for artifacts. You can also cast it as a prototype for 3 and a red, which means it still has affinity, so it'd basically be 1 red for a 2/2. You know, this would be great with Simulacrum Synthesizer and cards like that. I think that this slots into the cube would need to change in order for this card to be something I'm interested in.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it. I mean, you could make this card playable, but I think it's in a lot of ways a worse version of existing things. Like, they just keep making more and more busted affinity and improvised cards. I'm pretty skeptical that there's a world where I'm wanting to spend my mana on this.
Yeah, this looks like a worse version of his existing things. It's not completely implausible, but I don't think it makes sense right now. Furnace Hellkite, speaking of which, 5 red for a 5/5 flyer, affinity for artifacts, and you can pump it. Yeah, there's kind of the same argument here. I actually think this is a lot worse because it's an artifact than if it wasn't, because typically like the Broodstar type effect, you know, or like the Somber Hover Guard and the Cloud Djinn or whatever, the big affinity card that's not an artifact itself is nice because you play it and it gets around shatters. This still just gets hit by Shatter Reclamation Sage pretty savagely. I think this is not going to make the cut right here, though it is nice with Mishra's Workshop.
Keep us updated on that as we go on. There'll be some more.
1 in a red, Party Thrasher. For a 2 mana, 1/4, non-creature spells you cast from exile have Convoke. Okay. But at the beginning of your main phase, you can discard a card, your pre-combat main phase, discard a card, and if you do, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and then choose 1. You can play that card this turn. So this gives you card selection. You discard a card and then get to play 1 card. So you're even on cards, but you get to look at 2, so you get a little bit of choice. And this helps cast them. If it's a non-creature, this can already tap for 1, and maybe your other creatures do too. Feels like a lot of things spinning around, a lot of spinning wheels. I'm not really sure this gets you anywhere, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's certainly something. I mean, it's the fact that you get selection makes it, you know, a better version of the Inti ability in some ways, though it's not going to trigger off your other discards.
No, there are also plenty of cards that reward you for playing cards from exile, so I could see kind of trying to slot that kind of package in. Right now, I think this is probably a worse version of existing things, probably a D. Sundering Eruption, it's 2 in a red, sorcery, destroy target land. They can go get a basic and put it in play tapped, and then creatures without flying can't block this turn, plus it's a land on the other side. Another one of those. I don't like this one. I don't think this one's going to be that interesting. I mean, I guess an aggressive red deck is just playing this as a falter.
Yeah, it's just basically the only part of the text that's relevant is the creatures without flying can't block this turn, I think, for Cube. I mean, I'm sure it could come up, but like you would do this to your Academy opponent, but being able to make creatures without flying can't block this turn on an untapped land is something you would actively probably want to take fairly highly in a red deck, a red creature attacking deck. So I don't think it's F range. I think it's probably going to be D range, maybe even B range, but it's weird because it's the headline. I think the exciting part of the card for Cube is really buried by the whole land part.
Yeah, I could see trying it. Birthing Rituals and Enchantment. Oh, yet another birthing pod. They've been trying to chase that high for a decade, you know, more than that. So 1 in a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, look at the top 7 cards of your library. What a line. Then you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, you can put a creature card with mana value X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield, where X, of course, is X plus 1. X is 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value, and put the rest on the bottom. So it's a 2 mana birthing pod that costs nothing to activate, but you only get selection out of the top 7. So imagine you like play this, you have a 2-drop and a 3-drop in play, and you're like, well, if I hit a 3 or a 4, I can sack one of these to put those into play. I'm not really sold on this. Birthing Pod is a lot more powerful, and that card hasn't been good enough for Cube for a while.
Yeah. So I think the just the baseline dream with this card is that on turn 1 or on turn 2 you play this, on turn 3 you play a 3-drop, and then on turn 4 you're getting a decent amount of looks at another 3-drop or a 4-drop. And there are some powerful ones you could hit. The fact
right
that this
away
card...
you can like if you play this on turn 2, then play a turn 3 card, you can go right up to 4 if you want.
Yeah, so the fact that this could accelerate you and doesn't require you, like, the problem with Birthing Pod was it sort of felt like there was too many moments where your opponents could break things up. Like if you just play this on turn 2, you get to play your 3-drop and use it on turn 3. That's pretty nice. That was a curve that kind of existed with Birthing Pod, but not really. You needed to untap with Mana Dorks to make that happen. So the fact that this card can work in like just like a green-white beatdown deck or some other green deck where you don't have a lot of Mana Dorks makes this more interesting to me. But you can't. you're not always going to get what you want, and sometimes it's going to do nothing. So it's probably
And you're
not
down
there,
a
but
card
I
by
do
playing
look forward to
this.
trying it.
Like, if you play
that's
this
true.
and turn a 3 into a 4, you're still not really ahead, I don't think. You'd need to, like, get maybe 2 activations out of this before I'd be satisfied. So, yeah, I'm going to say F on Birthing Ritual. Bridgeworks Battle. This one actually looks pretty good. This is a 2 and a green sorcery. Give one of your creatures +2/+2 and fight an opposing creature, and it's a land on the other side. This is a great way for green to get a little more interaction into their deck. I'm definitely going to put this in. This looks like a B to me, maybe an A, honestly.
Yeah, it's difficult because like when you just don't have a creature, and you're in one of these like sort of race where you're fighting over the board, it's so painful that this is also costing you 3 life and that any instant speed effect can break this up. We've had weaker versions of this that have felt not close to me, so maybe this gets there, but I don't think that this is going to be as consistent as you want it to be for something that's going to pay, you have to pay life every time you play it as a land.
I don't know. I think the rate seems pretty good. +2/+2 and fight, like you're getting to whack them with the creature afterwards. It's pretty nice. We'll have to see, I guess. But I like the way Bridgeworks. I would give Bridgeworks Battle a B, and you would give it like a C.
Well, more like a D. I don't think like you're not really going to change the cube to make this card. The C tier is the weird one. You kind of have to jump for B to D when you have something generic. You're not sure if it's good enough.
All right, Eladamri Corvik 1 green for a 3/3 legendary creature. It's now warrior. You can look at the top card of your library at any time and cast creatures from it. And you can pay green tap and tap 2 untapped creatures you control. Reveal a card from your hand or the top of your library. If the revealed card is a creature, put it onto the battlefield. And you can only do it on your turn. So it's a 3-mana 3/3 that lets you play creatures off the top. And then once you get enough creatures, it's an Elvish Piper. You can pay a green, tap it, tap 2 other creatures and play a creature free. Way too many finicky things. Mostly what's going to happen is you're going to cast this and it's going to die and you're going to get nothing out of it. Like, it would take a lot to make this good. So I think Eladamri looks like an F to me. I'm not into it. Flare of Cultivation. This is the green flare. And it's Cultivate. You search your library for 2 basic lands, reveal them, put 1 on the battlefield tapped, the other into your hand. I'm not into this one. Like, sacrificing a creature to get 2 lands, only one of which goes into play, that's a pretty big cost, and you're not ramping by that much. Like, what is your deck looking like? What kind of creature are you sacrificing? What are you trying to do with this? I don't know. Do you have some answers here?
I mean, there's cards we could have in the cube, your Icefang Quotals and your Elvish
Arboreal
Visionaries.
Grazer.
Arboreal Grazer, which is a card we could have in.
I had Arboreal Grazer in when I had the full lands package, and it was fine. But look at turn 1 Grazer, play it. Put a land into play, sack it, put another land into play, land in hand, 4 mana on turn 2. But you just have these cards in your deck that, I mean, I guess here's the case for Flare of Cultivation. It wasn't that long ago that Cultivate was a fine card in Cube, and this you can still cast for 1 green and put a land into play, a land in your hand. That's not terrible, but I don't think that the support is here. This does look like a C. I bet I could envision a Cube where this is okay, but it would need a lot more land support than we currently have. Monstrous Vortex. 3 and a green, it's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, you discover X, where X is that spell's mana value, so you cascade into something else. If you hit multiple 5-power creatures, you can just chain into it and, just keep going. And I guess the joke is you play this on turn 4, and then on turn 5, or maybe accelerated, who knows, you play like a Bristlebud Farmer, and you get to discover and play another spell, and sometimes you even get to go for a third one if you hit another big creature. I think this looks like a pretty strong constructed card. I bet there's some shenanigans you can get up to. My guess is in Cube, you would need this to trigger twice to get value back, and even then, it's not necessarily good enough.
Yeah, it's just too finicky, too slow. Like, it eventually kind of can get fast, but there's no guarantee, like, even the first or second time you discover, you're going to hit a card that you want to play right now or is impactful right now. And if that's the case, we're doing a lot for not.
It's
not
nice
much.
with Croxa and Huro.
Factual.
6. That's it. 6.
It dodges all the pitch elementals, notably.
Yes. So this is as in Renin 6. 2 and a green for a 2/4 legendary Treefolk with reach. When it attacks, you mill 3 cards, and then you put a land into your hand from among them. And during your turn, non-land permanents have retrace, so you can cast them out of your graveyard by discarding a land. This is kind of interesting. Compare this to Sentinel of the Lost City, right? The 3/4 that makes map tokens. You get a 2/4 reach. When it attacks, you draw a land a good amount of the time, and you can play cards out of your graveyard. It's still 1-for-1. You're discarding a land, but I mean, obviously, this is fueling that both ways. I'd be interested in trying this.
Yeah, to me, I think this is an A. This card looks unbelievable to me. The fact that like it's got 3-mana 2/4 reach, so it's doing something impactful, and like Sentinel, it can generate value. The thing that differentiates it from Sentinel and other cards like that is you can set up some situations where you just go absolutely bananas. Like imagine you have 5 mana and you have a 1-mana removal spell like a Swords to Plowshares or a Fatal Push, and you just have a couple lands in your play. You just play this and you just machine gun down 2 of their creatures on turn 5 or earlier if you're a green deck. So the fact that this both generates value when you can just accelerate to play it early, but you can also set up a sick turn, the turn that you play it, means I think this is an extremely powerful card to me.
How would your opinion change if you read the card, though?
What do you mean? Oh, permanent cards. All right. You let me go for a while there.
Oh, I did.
All right, then I just put this down in the B range.
I do think it's very good still. And also, you want to hear a combo? This is a card that makes Black Lotus better.
Very true.
Ooh, you pop off with that thing. I think this card is actually quite good. I was thinking it was a B range card. The main issue, well, the main difference, obviously, yes, if you could cast spells out of your graveyard, this card would pop off because spells are cheap and go back into your graveyard, so you're just casting them multiple times a turn.
Yeah.
There's still some really good cheap cards to play. Obviously, Black Lotus is one of them, but even without Black Lotus, like, imagine this in a late game in one of the decks that you like to draft, and you cast this, and then you cast like a Tamiyo out of your graveyard, or you cast a Broadside Bombardiers out of your graveyard or something like that. This card looks really strong to me, and 3-mana 2/4 reach is like pretty burly, so I would definitely be interested in trying this. I think this is going to be a staple. Like, my guess is it's between a B and an A, but given how good Sentinel has been, that's a good comparison point. This looks like it's got a lot more power in the late game, even if maybe in the early game it's not quite as good. Still, you attack and you draw a land a good amount of the time. You're playing more than a third lands, so you have if you have like a 40% chance to hit a land and you're milling 3 cards, it's 120% chance of getting a land here. So. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
okay.
I was listening to some of the podcasts you like when I was putting the math together. Let's go to Sowing Myco Spawn. It's 3 green for a 3/3 devoid. It has kicker of 1 and a colorless, but you have to have actual colorless to pay that. So it's 2 mana total. And when you cast it, you go get a land and put it on the battlefield. Any land untapped. And if it was kicked, you exile a land. I'm into this thing.
This card is so broken with Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah, that's the card I was immediately thinking of getting. But imagine you have 2 creatures in your play and you just play this, get a Cradle. It's like this cost 1 mana. And then next turn, you just get to do even more. And, there's plenty of colorless sources in the cube. You have a Talisman, you have a Wasteland, you have, a mana artifact of some kind. And getting to just exile one of their lands and just play that is pretty sick. Yeah, getting Cradle, getting Shelldock Isle. Like, compare this to Golos. Like, this is very comparable, and it's cheaper. It doesn't have the big ability, but it has the kicker ability, and it's untapped land. Yeah, this looks like a cube staple. This looks like a really fun card. Springheart Nantuko. So it's a 1 and a green for a 1/1 enchantment creature. And it's got Bestow of 1 and a green, so you can play it as an enchantment on a creature and give a creature +1/+1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a green if it's attached to a creature you control, and if you do, you get a copy of that creature. So you play this for 2 mana on a creature, the creature gets +1/+1, and then it has landfall, pay 2 mana, make a copy. It also says if you didn't create a token this way, create a 1/1 insect creature token. So as long as this is in play as a creature or on a creature, every land you play makes you a 1/1 at the very least. Unless I'm getting that wrong somehow. I would totally believe if I did, but I think that's how it works.
I think that's how it works, and this card looks really great to me. Like, I would be pretty into playing this card if it was just if it didn't have all of the bestow text, and all it could ever do was just be a 2 mana 1/1 that had landfall, make 1/1 insects. Like, it works really well with Gaia's Cradle, and it can really start popping off for all of your cards which want you to have lots of creatures in play. But then once your green ramp deck gets a lot of mana going, the fact that you get to bestow this and then start making multiple copies of your Railway Brawlers or Bristleblood Farmers, things like that, and that when
Do you
you
think you're ever
bestow
going to
it,
put this on a Carnage Tyrant? Or Vaultborn Tyrant, rather?
that sounds pretty lovely, actually. I would love
It's not
to do that.
impossible to untap with Vaultborn Tyrant. The game still does often go on from that point. If you're in that situation and you bestow this and you play it, then you get 2 Vaultborn Tyrant triggers, the game is obviously just over at that point.
Yeah. So with green and green ramp in particular, it's so great if the card can both be useful early and be more useful late, and this is definitely a card that fits that description.
All right, I'm giving this a B, but I could see it moving up to an A. It really depends on how many ways you have to use the tokens.
Yeah, and this is a card which does reward you for playing with Force of Cultivation. You can use it with it, but also it does give you some nice value when you sack even something like a Mana Dork on turn 2 with this card in play.
Yeah, all right. Well, Springheart Nantuko, you stock and Gaia's Cradle rising rapidly. Abstruse Appropriation. This one's for sure making it into the cube. Black-white has some mediocre cards because this one's nice. 2 black-white for an instant devoid. Exile target non-land permanent, and then you can cast that permanent as long as it remains exiled, spending mana of any color to cast it. Awesome. It's a 4 mana instant speed Vindicate. Well, I guess it doesn't hit lands, but you just get to cast the card later. It's obviously not quite Fracture Identity levels in terms of the immediate impact, but I mean, you get to cast this at instant speed, and then it's very comparable to 4 mana instant exile target non-land permanent draw card, except the card you draw is almost by definition something pretty good. Why else would you be exiling it? So
yeah,
definitely into this. This looks like an A. Looks like a cube staple, I think. Multicolor cards, especially in the weaker color pairs, have a kind of low bar to make it in sometimes, and this I think does clear that bar.
Yeah, it varies a lot between the color combos, and Orzhov is definitely one where the bar is not high.
That's why I was so happy to get Pillage the Bog. Golgari was really lacking, and Pillage the Bog is just an awesome way to slot in there.
You didn't like your 13th different variation of kill a creature and some other type of non-land permanent?
Yeah, Maelstrom Pulse, Abrupt Decay, blah, blah, blah. Blood-Soaked Insight. 5 and 2 red-black hybrid mana sorcery. So 7 mana, but it costs 1 less to cast for each life your opponent have lost this turn, so that does include like combat damage. Target opponent exiles the top 3 cards of their library. Until end of your next turn, you can play those cards by spending any type of mana or color of mana to cast them. So basically, it's a 7 mana draw 3, but you have 1 turn to play it. It's off their deck, but it gets cheaper if you've dealt damage. And this exciting part, it's a land. You can play it as a tapped red-black land. Kind of into this as like a red-black aggro kind of push card. Like I could see also, depending on what the other cards in the cycle look like, maybe slotting in one flip card for each color pair or something along those lines, or maybe just the ones that are good. Blood-Soaked Insight looks like it's plausible. It at least does something interesting.
Yeah, I think this one suffers a lot from the timing not really working very well in the sense of, okay, I'm hitting my opponent, I'm successfully dealing combat damage. Is the thing that I want to be doing right now taking my foot off the brakes to be exiling some cards from their deck that then I hope are good and then I need to spend some mana on to make use of in a future turn? And that sounds a little like, I don't know how often that all's coming together in a way that I'm going to feel satisfied by. Being a black-red tap duel does have its costs, especially given that we're talking about a deck that is likely trying to curve out. So I think the whole package isn't quite getting there for me, but I'm open to the possibility of being wrong because, it doesn't take that much of a reduction in cost for this effect to be pretty good.
Yeah, if you're playing it for 3 mana, I think you're not too unhappy. But I agree. If you're beating down, you don't really want to spend a bunch of mana on something that doesn't further the beatdown plan. So, skeptical on this one, but it is kind of interesting. A tap land is nice. Brea, Ethereum Shaper. So, white, blue, red, black. So, every color but green for a 4/4. When ETBs, you make 2 1/1 blue Thopters with flying, and you can pay 2 and sack 2 artifacts to either deal 3 damage to target player or planeswalker, give a creature -4/-4, or gain 5 life. I'm pretty sure this is a reprint too, but
yep, I see that symbol. Yeah, anytime you see a symbol in the text box of the card or watermark, that is from the set it was originally printed in.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd actually, even though this is a reprint and we haven't added it yet, I don't think it's a crazy card to add. I mean, there's some decks that would be pretty happy with it. So I could see looking at some of the 4-color cards as well. Like compare this to an Omnath. It's comparable for sure.
Yeah, how's it doing Mishra's Workshop wise for a 4-drop?
Not good. Not good, Mishra's Workshop wise, just so you know. Cranial Ram. Oh, soon to be banned in Pauper. Red black for a living weapon that's plus X+1. Is it where X is the number of artifacts you control, and it has equipped 2. So by itself, it's a 2-mana 1/1, but obviously in the right deck, it could be like a 7/1 or something, and you can equip it. I mean, the fact that it starts out as a creature compared to something like Cranial Plating, which is plus X+0, it goes a long way. Red black makes it a little tougher, but if you wanted like the Ethereum, Pterodon, and like the other like black aggressive artifacts in your cube, I could see this being good, but it would be a C otherwise. I don't think it's there in current cube.
Yeah, red has really upped its game recently in terms of just having artifacts incidentally. Black is not quite there yet, but it's something we could work on.
Drowner of Truth is 5 and 2 blue-green hybrid mana for a 7/6 devoid. If you cast it and you spent colorless to cast it, you get 2 Eldrazi spawn, and it's a blue-green tap land.
This just looks like an F to me. There's no world in which I care enough about having a 7-drop option to be willing to just play green-blue tap duel.
Pretty big, but yeah. Glasswing Grace gives a creature +2/+2 flying and lifelink and costs 3 and 2 white-black hybrid, as well as being a tap duel. Yeah, I don't think this one makes it either. It's got some definitely high-end plays. Anytime you give a creature a +2/+2 flying and lifelink, you're talking potentially up to like a 12-point life swing if you put it on like a 4/4. But I think that this is still probably not good enough.
Yeah, we saw it a lot with the cycles from Zendikar. It's just like once the mana cost starts getting into that 5, 6, 7 range, it's like, how am I not playing this as a land? It's a 5-drop. I need mana.
Kudo, King Among Bears. Green-white for a 2/2 legendary bear, and it makes all other creatures 2/2 bears. They keep their abilities, but they have a base power and toughness of 2/2. Doesn't look very good to me, but I guess the joke is that you have like pump spells, and now your creatures are the Kings Among Bears.
I think the joke is that the alpha set has a card called Grizzly Bears that's a 2-mana 2/2.
That is mostly the joke, but as we've seen, the joke in this set is mostly limited to callbacks of previous designs. Haven't seen a whole lot of particularly original jokes. And I'm an expert on unoriginal jokes, trust me. This is Legion Leadership is 1 in a red-white hybrid mana for an instant target until end of turn. Double target creature's power and it gains first strike. So not double strike, but double its power and it gains first strike. Wild. I guess you get to do something new there. Also, it's a tapped red-white land. Also, I don't want to put this card in the cube.
Yeah, it is slightly better. Double your power and first strike is mostly better than double strike because you get to, if you have a 2/2 double strike and it goes into a 3/3 blocker, this card will win, whereas the other card would trade.
Great. Thank you for that. Nadu Winged Wisdom. Oh, this card might
What were
break
we getting
Modern.
at, a D? I don't know. I mean, it can push a bunch of damage, but
Yeah,
where do you want to go?
Like a D.
Okay.
Nadu Winged Wisdom. 1 blue-green for a 3/4 flyer. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card in your library. If it's a land, put it into play. Otherwise, put it in your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn. Note that because of the cunning use of quotation marks, each creature can do this twice per turn. It's not just this ability overall happens. It gives that ability to each creature. I mean, where this is going to pop off in Modern, obviously, is with cards like Shuka, which can target for 0. Cube isn't quite like that, but 3-mana 3/4 flyer, when they target it, you draw a card or put a land into play, is not terrible. And this makes all your creatures, protects all your creatures, kind of like a Leovold. It's like a 3/4 flying Leovold without the card draw stuff. But also when you target your creatures, you get the same ability. This card seems like it's definitely worth trying. I don't know if it'll be good enough, but it looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, I was thinking it's kind of C-tierish. Like, it would be nice to make like 5 or so changes to green or blue to give you some interesting
Yeah, we are.
options.
The
like,
+2/+2 and fight spell.
It is good with that.
Pyrokinesis, ever heard of it? Play this, Pyrokinesis for your 4 creatures for 1 each. Oof.
I've heard of pyrokinesis.
I think that this card would be greatly improved if we made a couple changes, like you said, put in maybe some cheap ways or 0 mana ways to target. But I think as it currently stands, it's actually still something I would want to try. Like I do think this card it has some legs. Well, I guess it's a bird. It probably does have legs. Flage, Titan of Fire's Fury. This is another very inspired design. It's a 1 red white for a 6/6 Titan. It's like Kroxa or Uro, but it casts Lightning Helix. Otherwise, it's exactly the same.
I didn't notice it was like those. Oh yeah, that's good.
Red, white. Exile 5 cards. This card clearly good enough. I mean, Kroxa I think borders on being good enough. It is generally not. Like I usually don't include that card lately. Uro I actually think is great. I've had a lot of fun playing Uro. This isn't a color pair that doesn't put cards in the graveyard quite as easily, but like you're telling me you're not going to put this in one of your like Jeskai decks that is and use this as like early Lightning Helix it's a finisher later, or just like a red-white deck that has Seasoned Pyromancer in it. Like there's a lot of ways to make this pop.
Yeah, I find your Boros decks tend to more often be like white splashing great red cards, or like red is clearly the secondary color. But once you have Flage, it becomes definitely more attractive to be more even and maybe even lean a little bit more red because you are getting the discard cards. Any discard effect is so nice with Flage because you could both discard Flage, but also just discarding is a good way to efficiently get up to the 5 cards for the escape.
Oh, actual grade, I would give it probably a B. Like I wouldn't say cube staple because I think Uro and Kroxa are like borderline. Like Kroxa is like a B bordering on like a D because of our really great grading system. Though I do think this one actually communicates what we want. And Uro is like a B to an A. Like I wouldn't think twice if someone cut it, but I have liked it. I think Flage probably falls into that B-A category. Planar Genesis is blue-green for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a land into play from among them onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't, put one of the cards in your hand. This card looks sweet. It's an impulse that also combines like with a growth spiral where you can impulse if you want to land, it just comes in tapped. But if you don't want to land, it's just an impulse.
On turn 2, it's worse than growth spiral. Basically every turn after that, it is much better than growth spiral.
Yeah. It basically doesn't let you get the ramp plus the card draw. It's one or the other, but the card draw effect is a lot more selective than that. Also, there's times when this is better than Growth Spiral on turn 2. What if you kept a 2-land hand and you just cast this looking for your land, right? Like, I don't know that this will make the cut, but because Simic is a pretty contested color pair. A lot of cards I like in Simic, so especially since we just saw Nadu, but I wouldn't be surprised if Planar Genesis gets there. It's probably like a B-level card that might get pushed out due to card level slots. Psychic Frog, like a Psychotog. Blue-green for a 1/2, blue-black for a 1/2. When it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, draw a card, and you can discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard to give it flying. Well, definitely going to play this card. I think Lazov, the blue-black Lazov is quite cuttable. It's just a fine card. Psychic Frog seems like it's got some legs. I mean, look at it. It's tons of legs. You play this. If they don't have a blocker or a removal spell, it immediately gets in for a card. A lot of removal spells miss on this because
if they have a blocker, it's not going to go well for them.
Yeah, they can't lightning bolt it. Like, that doesn't work. And if they have a blocker on turn 2, you might not be able to give it flying. But then at that point, you just utilize the fact that you're playing blue-black and cast a removal spell and attack and draw a card. 2 mana, 1/2.
Or like what blocker do they have? Do they have like a 1/1 death touch? You could just discard 2 cards and your thing's a 3/4.
Yeah, no, this is great. You might not get your card right away. The bad scenario there is if they play a blocker, you attack and you discard a card or 2, and then they untap and then they kill it. Like, you might have gotten the worst end of that exchange, But yeah, what are they playing that has 3 power on turn 2? Usually they're going to have a 2 power blocker, and then you're just maybe trade 1 for 1 at worst. Psychic Frog looks great. This looks like a cube staple to me.
I think it might even be better than that. It's also a discard outlet for Reanimator. It's absolutely nuts with the draw 7s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, maybe this is broken. S tier. This could be one of our first S tier cards here.
Like, you can't describe to me what your blue-black deck is doing where Psychic Frog isn't insane for you.
Is it good in Lurrus?
Yes, it's extremely good in lure.
Lure, it's one of the biggest traps. We all know that. All right, S tier Psychic Frog. We'll get in there. Pyretic Rebirth. 2 red black. Instant. Return target artifact or creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then it deals damage equal to that card's mana value up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. So you can't 15 them with Emrakul. Like, you can't trigger on the stack, return it, nug them for 15 because it only hits creatures or planeswalkers. But it is a regrowth that then kills something. My guess is this is just too situational to be particularly good.
Yeah, the combination of like you needing it to be kind of expensive for the damage to be consistent, but yet you're playing it on like 4 mana. This card could have highs, but I think this is just kind of like compare this card to Kolaghan's Command. I would much rather just have the ability to just get a creature back. That's okay. I can always deal 2. I can always blow an artifact. I can always make you discard than whatever this card can do for 1 more mana.
Yeah, I mean, how good would 4 mana, deal 4 draw card be? And like that wouldn't be a card I would be that interested in cube most of the time. And this, you're going to jump through some hoops to basically get that. So looks like it's a D to me. Revitalizing Repast. It's a black-green hybrid card. It's an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature against indestructible, and it's a land. So a black-green tap land. I mean, we've played with like Legolas's quick reflexes and cards like that. I think that it's okay to have some amount of that, and this can play nicely. Like there's matchups where this card could be really good. Tap lands, there's just so many in the cube is part of the reason that I'm a little gun shy here is like the surveil lands are great. They're already pushing out most of the creature lands. And I would have a hard time wanting to include this over something. Though I guess black-green specifically has really bad creature land.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah, just being 1 mana, like even we talk sometimes we've seen other versions of this sort of like, hey, you get a land or a 2 mana protection effect. But 1 mana permanent indestructibility or permanent +1/+1 counter, the indestructibility is temporary. Indestructible is not hexproof, so and it is not protection from exile, so it's not always reliable. That probably knocks it down. The fact that like you play against a white deck and it's like, yeah, my removal spell doesn't care is probably making this not quite getting there, but it's better than most of the duels we've seen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I still think it's like a D, but I wouldn't think it's crazy to try. Satya, Etherflux Genius. So this is a reprint also.
No, it's not. Is it?
No, it's not. I was just saying that. VK, thank you for putting this list together. That was great.
Yeah.
This is 1 blue, red, white for a 3/5 legendary human artificer. It's got menace and haste. All right, so it's 4 mana, 3/5 menace haste, but tricky mana to cast. It's Jeskai to cast. When it attacks, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of 1 other target non-token creature you control, and you get 2 energy, but you have to sack the creature unless you pay energy equal to its mana value. I'm interested in this. Like,
yeah, this looks like this could be better than Aragorn to me. There's a lot going on.
I mean, menace haste for 4 mana at a 3/5, like this will kill a planeswalker pretty nicely. If you can copy a value creature, like copying a seasoned pyromancer, I don't need many ways to make broadside bombardiers better, but it is pretty sick when you copy it because then you get to throw both of them. Like one throws the other. Like you throw the copy version for 5. What other creatures are we following up with this? Besides like season.
Well, anything big is just you're just getting the haste version right away, and then really this card you want to think. I think first and foremost with this card with 2 drops, they got to be non-legendary. Not to copy them, but really to get any value, assuming we don't care about like the ETB. Like, technically you could copy like your Ajani and then that would be a cat dying, but you wouldn't get to keep it.
Yeah, but this looks worth trying. Aragorn's pretty good, but it's not crazy good, and this looks like it does some really interesting stuff at the very least. Like
I think we're seeing a lot more rewards for ETBs and blink type stuff in this set. So there's going to be some amount of like
finally someone
pull
rewards the ETBs that we were all waiting for. But yeah, even just playing a 2, like here's where the mana cost comes into play. But if you copy any 2 or 3 drop and just attacks for a ton of damage, it's a little trickier because you're probably paid some costs to make sure you could curve out nicely into a 3-color card. But I could definitely see playing like Fairy Mastermind into this. It'd just be awesome.
Can I give you a combo I think you'll be excited by? This card following up a turn 2 Generous Plunderer.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage this turn, and then next turn you have 2 Generous Plunderers in play, and then you attack with 3 Generous Plunderers. Ooh. Yeah. I'm in. Yeah. This looks like a B. I'm in to try this card. Strength of the Harvest, another one of the flipped lands. It's 2 and a green-white, and it gives a creature a +1/+1 for each creature or enchantment you control. No, I'm off it. F.
Yeah, I mostly kept that one in for completionist's sake.
No, totally fair. Stomp. 1 and a green-red hybrid mana. So 2 mana. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. And it's a red-green tap land. Oh, I kind of like this one. This is cheaper than the Fight at the Bridge card. And it hits planeswalkers. It's not a fight. It just whacks it. Tap lands are tap lands, but I bet a lot of red-green decks would play this. Does this get to the threshold of like, am I excited to take this card, or is it mostly just I will play this card because the rate on flip lands is pretty good?
Yeah, I you said tap lands is tap lands. I do think it's worth noting that like tap lands are not the same in every color combination, and green-red is one that I'm particularly not excited to be playing tap lands.
Yeah, probably not going to make it then. Looks like another D. White of the Reliquary. Wow, they're really on point with all the callbacks here. Green-black for a 2/2 zombie knight with vigilance. It gets +1/+1 for each creature in your graveyard, and you can tap and sack a creature to put a land into play tapped. I mean, if there's like a dredge, self-mill, graveyard type strategy, this could be pretty good. And
yeah,
if you're making tokens, like again, this goes into the whole Yawgmoth kind of thing, because going to get your guy's cradle, right?
You want to hear a sick combo?
Oh yeah, always.
This card with the Spring Bloom, the Bestow, the Nantuku.
Oh,
whatever it's called.
Yeah. Sack one of the tokens, go get a land, trigger it again. Yeah, we're really talking. I think this is a C. If the cube was built for this looks like a great addition to it. I don't think it's currently built where this card would do all that much. A new Emrakul. So this is 12 mana, 12/12. When you cast it, gain control of all your opponent's creatures. It has flying, protection from spells, and from permanents that were cast this turn. So they can't Oblivion Ring or Planeswalker it right away. When it leaves the battlefield, you sack all your creatures, and it has Madness 6 colorless. I don't think that part is going to happen very often. How good is this? It's when you cast. This looks a lot like the 13 mana Emrakul, the Promised End, where you take their turn, in that you can make a cube where maybe this is something you're doing, but I don't think this slots into most cubes.
Nah, yeah, not really. It's pretty annoying that even if you were to cheat this into play, you still have to deal with the leaves the battlefield ability, and you're not getting the cast ability. I guess one positive thing I could say for Emrakul the World Anew is that this is about as good as you're going to get for like outside of Progenitus, for this thing cannot be killed by your opponent. Because it's getting protection from spells and from permanents cast this turn, it's not getting touched by some things that can touch the original Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn. Things like Teferi the Time Raveler, Solitude, or Oblivion Rings. Yeah, Solitude, a good example.
Though, funnily enough, if you were to Savine's Reclamation of Teferi into play, you could bounce this.
That is funny.
There are some things. I think this looks like an F, honestly. I just don't see how you're casting this. You're paying 12 mana? How are you getting 6 colorless and a discard outlet?
Yeah, so notably for the rules of Magic as stands, it's an easy one to house rule. You can't just add wastes to your deck, but that's a pretty reasonable thing to house roll if you just think that's more fun.
Yeah, though I don't think that would still make this too good.
Oh, no.
Kozilek's a 9 mana, 9/9. Eldrazi, of course. When you cast it, up to 2 target players manifest 2 cards from their hand, and for each card manifested this way, you draw a card. So you can actually force them to put 2 cards, their worst 2 cards in as 2/2s, and you draw 2 cards, which is probably worth it, especially if they have like 2 cards in their hand or something. And other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. I actually really like when they do like kind of weird stat stuff like that. I think that it makes the game more interesting. So you play this, you have to cast it. You can force them to put 2 cards into play as 2/2s, and you draw 2 cards, and you get two 5/4s in play and draw 2 cards if you have 2 cards in hand. Presumably you'll want to do it to yourself.
Well, you're probably going to draw 4 off this, or at least you're going to a lot of the time.
You do have to have the cards in hand first if you want to do it. So you're going to play this as a 9/9 for 9 that draws 4, gets 2 5/4s, and they kind of semi-discard 2 cards. I still think 9 is just too much to cast. Like, you're just not able to do that in Cube most of the time.
Yeah, like, it really gets hurt by not being castable off of Mishra's Workshop, Might and Weak Stone.
Yeah, Channel is good with this one. This one, like, better, because the other Emrakul, that we just saw, like, channeling Emrakul the World Anew into play doesn't really do anything. It's a 12/12, but it's kind of hard to strike the balance of I'm channeling early enough that I still have life and you have creatures in play. Whereas, like, channeling Kozilek on turn 2 sounds incredible. Like, you end up with a 9/9 and 2 5/4s. Maybe they end up with 2 2/2s. I guess the downside is if they then kill this, it's your 2/2s against their 2/2s, and you're not really ahead anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Emrakul's big upside is just being flying basically hexproof for 12/12.
I would not add this as currently stands, but it wouldn't be crazy if you wanted to. Part of the thing that all the other Eldrazi's do, and these are intentionally not like that, is when you sneak them in with Sneak Attack or Goryo's Vengeance, you get to annihilate them. This doesn't do it that way. And if you look at current cube lists, the Eldrazi's from the subsequent sets that didn't have Annihilator, almost none of those see play either. Like, you don't see Mill-20 Ulamog or anything like that, or Kozilek the Great Distortion. It just, I didn't want to make cards that did that, and that's totally fine. It just means that these don't tend to see too much play. So I would say this is probably a D. It's a worse version of existing Eldrazi. If you really wanted to play it, you could put it in your cube. It'd be fine. But
yeah, and it's D bordering on C maybe, just because there is like Eldrazi Temple, Eye of Ugin, and additional like Eldrazi Scion type cards you could play.
If you wanted to get Kozilek's Return and the Ulamog's Great Distortion or whatever to bounce spell in, and you want Eldrazi Temple and Eye of Ugin, you could do all that. I don't know how well it would work, but you could try it. Speaking of which, Ulamog the Great Defiler. So this one is a little more interesting, though. So this is 10 mana for a 7/7. When you cast it, they exile half their library, which means if you cast 2 of these, they're just dead. And it has Ward, Sacrifice 2 permanents, so it's a little difficult. It's punishing to target. They can always do it because they're going to have lands in play, but it is punishing. It enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. And note, this counts yours. And it has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. This one actually does work with Goryo's Vengeance or Sneak Attack as long as something is exiled. Imagine, this is the combo in Modern, maybe. Imagine you griefed them exiling a Shieldred. So now Shieldred's the most expensive exiled card. If you sneak this in, it's got Annihilator 4.
Yeah, that's true. The exiling is not overlapping terribly well with the color combinations. You'd really like to be white, but yeah.
Yeah, there is maybe a little something here. I think it's one too many hoops to jump through to also need something exiled, but there's a lot of pitch cards that exile in the cube right now. If you exile with some effect, like you said, this could sometimes have like Annihilator 6. This could go pretty big. It could go even bigger. Imagine if you Goryo's Vengeance them with a Kozilek, and then the next Goryo's Vengeance, this is Annihilator 10.
Yeah. The biggest issue I have with this card is I do like it comes up when you have Kozilek in the cube that you can just cast OG Kozilek for 10 mana, and this is in a similar range. Same with Ulamog, the second Ulamog. And for that sort of effect, this one looks pretty bad in the sense of, unless you're literally channeling this out very fast, just like stack 2 permanents for the ward, lose half my deck is just not punishing enough.
Yeah. Well, I would say this is a D, but again, I wouldn't think it'd be crazy if you wanted to try it. Disruptor Flute is a 2-mana artifact with flash. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a card name. Spells with the chosen name cost 3 more to cast. And activated abilities with sources of the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So it's kind of like a revoker of sorts. Like, it makes activated abilities just completely turn off, and it also makes that spell 3 more to cast. So if you have either knowledge of their hand or know what their deck really needs to cast, like you cast this and you name, Wrath of God or something. But my guess is this isn't quite there for cube. This looks like a D as well. Like we don't have Sorcerer's Spyglass in. I think the body on Revoker is pretty critical to it not being a dead card. All right, Archway of Innovation. It's a land. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island, and it taps for a blue. So it's kind of free-ish in blue decks. And you can pay a blue and tap it, and the next spell you cast this turn has Improvise, so you can tap artifacts to help pay for it. It's kind of like a weird Tolarian Academy, where you're sinking 2 mana in to start. So you have to tap at least 3 artifacts in order to get ahead. That, I think, makes it a little bit too finicky.
Yeah, the high end is really, really high with this, especially if you just have all of the like artifact token maker kind of cards, like the Chromos, Sea Sharks, the Heelys, but you just are lacking the Urzas and Academy. You might want this, but usually when that happens, you just end up cutting the expensive cards from your deck.
Yeah, so the best place to put this would be on like an X spell, so you're like a Walking Ballista or something like that. Because even like an Upheaval, where it would be potentially good, is you're still spending 2 mana to then tap 4 artifacts. So yeah, I guess it's a land that taps for 3 in that sense, and that is pretty strong. But as much as I love this kind of deck, my guess is this wouldn't do anything most of the time, even though it's relatively cheap to put in your deck.
Yeah, the floor is a little low on this one, but
yeah. Actually, I don't think it's that the floor is low, because the floor is pretty high. It's just an island. The ceiling is, I think, kind of low because it's hard to have it all line up such that it happens. Or maybe it just doesn't happen that often, I guess, is kind of like what I'm saying. Most of the time, this is going to be fine, but it won't usually do much. So it sounds like an ineffective use of a cube slot. I guess it's like a D for me. And this is the red one, Arena of Glory. ETB's tap unless you have a mountain, taps for red. Red, tap and exert it to add double red, and then if you spend the mana on a creature spell, it gains haste. And because you get double red, you can actually cast a creature using one of the mana, then cast another creature using the other if you have enough mana total to haste 2 creatures. I think this, again, would be solid in like a red aggro deck. I don't know, I could see wanting to play this card.
Yeah, it's a lot of the good red cards have haste already, so not much of a combo there, but this does look a lot more reliably doing something for you than the other one. And, there are just color combinations you can play this in where, even just to play, like just getting to tap this and your mountain and 2 swamps and like haste up a Shieldred, and now you're dealing them 4 and they're taking damage from the trigger. Yeah, that's a decent turn. And while it's costing you sort of mana for future turns, it's really only costing you 1 mana for future turns, and you're not paying any mana for the haste since you're getting 1 in, 2 coming out.
Yeah, I would say that this could be good. I think it's like a B level card. Mostly the reason we wouldn't add these is just, do we want to use more slots on kind of like low impact cards, but you would put this card in your deck most of the time.
Yeah.
Shifting Woodland. Now this one actually looks pretty interesting. So it's, again, enters tap unless you have a forest. If you have Delirium, so if you have 4 different card types in your graveyard, you can pay 2 green, and it becomes a copy of target permanent in your graveyard until end of turn. I mean, there's some stuff you could get up to here. Like, yeah, it's kind of like a Reanimator card. Deck.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, a lot of the good reanimation cards have ETBs or cast triggers. You're not going to be picking those up, but Delirium, not that hard to achieve in cube. You play with fetch lands, you play with some artifacts, instant sorcery creature, you get to 4 really fast. And you don't even need to, it's more about how reliably can you get to 4 by like turn 5, turn 6 is when this card is going to start getting useful. And coming into play untapped, if you have a forest, it's good to note just that it works with surveillance and triumphs and all the original duels. So even it's pretty hard. You have to have like a Blooming Marsh for this card to just not be untapped on subsequent turns.
Yeah, I mean, you can discard Emrakul, response to the trigger. You just boom, turn this into an Emrakul, attack them. Like, there's some things you could do with this. This one I want to try. This one I think is a B. Like the payoff here, unlike the last 2 we looked like, the payoff here is actually like really high, and the cost is still pretty low. So a little more interesting in the Shifting Woodland. Ugin's
that card isn't sorcery activation, huh? Yeah, I guess I just assumed it was till you said the Emrakul thing.
Ugin's Labyrinth is a very strong card. I think this is going to be potentially one of the more impactful cards for Modern, but I don't think it quite gets there for Cube. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. It taps for a colorless or 2 colorless if you imprinted, and you can tap it to get that card back later in the game. This just falls into the same category as all the other Eldrazi cards. If you're doing the Eldrazi thing, Ugin's Labyrinth looks great. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a card you can put in your cube and expect to really do much.
Yeah, I would say that's a C card.
Yeah. This is the backside of a Johnny, backside of Tamiyo, Sorin. Grist. We haven't actually talked about Grist yet, or Ral, but we'll get to them. Waterlogged Teachings is 3 in a blue-black hybrid instant. Search your library for an instant or card with flash, put it in your hand, and it's a tapped blue-black duel. Kind of a nice one here. Like, I would play this in my Demonic Consultation deck for sure.
Yeah, I'd play this card in every blue and black deck I've ever drafted for the last 10 years.
That sounds
but
like...
that doesn't mean it's good. It just means I would do it.
Well, so the reason I might want to try this one is blue-black actually doesn't mind tap lands quite as much as the other colors. Blue-black also, especially if you're in like the Doomsday track, really wants lands that provide both colors of mana. And when you cast this, it's actually a pretty high impact card. It's not dealing 3 to an attacking creature. You're going and getting a combo card out of your deck to combo them. So this looks like a B. I think I would want to try this, but we'll see how good it ends up being.
Do we want to admit to people how often you and I are going to play this in decks without any black mana or black cards?
No, we don't need to get into that. Strict Serenade, it counters, it's just like a swan song. It's blue, counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker, and that controller makes a 2/2. This falls into the category of sideboard card to me. I just don't think you can main deck this card and expect to do too much with it. Like, giving them a 2/2 flyer is such a massive cost.
Yeah, Swan Song kind of gets away with the fact that, like, hey, you're hitting a non-creature spell, giving them a creature. That means there's maybe a good chance that they're not really in the creature market utilizing it well. Just countering an Adelaide, and then they just still get a 2/2 flyer, and whatever they were going to attack with their Adelaide with is like, I'm not doing that great here, Bob.
Yeah, not great. So I think Strict Serenade looks like an F, honestly. Just doesn't look like it's worth it. Oh, yeah. Invert polarity. So this is blue, red for an instant. Choose target spell, then flip a coin. If you win the flip, gain control of that spell, and you can choose new targets. If you lose the flip, counter that spell. This card's really, really powerful. Like, imagine they put a really good card on the stack. Let's say the One Ring or Shieldred. Either you both get one, either you get this one or no one gets one. Like, it's a counter target spell, and if you win the coin flip, win the game.
Yeah, pretty insane.
I mean,
yeah, this card's really, really good.
This card's just cracked. I'm definitely like, this looks like an S tier card to me. Like, what card can they cast where you're not pretty happy? Like, yeah, you can't really counter a Wrath with this reliably. Like, if they're casting Wrath of God, it doesn't really help to do this. But any permanent they cast, targeting it with Invert Polarity, just it's like a win or a win. You know, either one is really good.
Yeah, I would say spot removal is kind of a case. Like, if you were to if you have the only creature in play and they go to Swords to Plowshares your thing, you might counter it, or it might just do literal nothing. But that doesn't sound too hard. It's not a color combination that's most in the market for like playing cards to protect your creatures from spot removal. So I don't really mind that.
Also,
I'm in the business for just winning games.
Either you counter the swords or you swords their creature. Like,
yeah,
it's just absurd. Yeah, this card I think is gonna make some waves. It's gonna win or lose a lot of games based on a coin flip, which is funny because like Magic players hate that, but drawing a card off your deck is just a weighted coin flip anyway. Like every amount of randomness in a game is some type of coin flip-esque, kind of like instance happening. This just puts it in your face, and it's like Mana Crypt, right? Like, Mana Crypt is literally a coin flip. Sometimes you will win or lose games based on the actual coin flip, but it's also like, oh man, I drew my 5th land on turn 6. If I drawn it turn 5, I would have won. It's like very similar to that. But in any case, Invert Polarity, very strong card. This is the Black Flare, Flare of Malice, so you can sack a non-token black creature to play it. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures or planeswalker they control. So they sack one total thing, whatever is the highest cost, or tied for the highest cost, they get to choose. Yeah, I mean, it's probably fine. I don't know. I'm not that excited by the prospect of this card. Is there something like if you had a Gravecrawler in your cube, this card would get a lot better. That's for sure.
That's true. Yeah, there's some things you could do to make this card pretty actively good for you, and I don't know. The floor of like 4 mana kill something ain't what it used to be. You do lose a lot of games in cube because your opponent just goes really fast against you, and this is very good for that situation. I like that it is like if your opponent were to be doing some kind of nonsense with Corpse Dance or Shallow Grave, this is a phenomenal response to that. So it has some highs, both in terms of maybe you can find fodder cards that work with it, and there are some spots where this is definitely going to be worth being a 0 mana pitch card, but it's not as good as some of the other ones.
No, pitching a card in play is a pretty big difference. So
yeah,
I think you could definitely put this in your cube. I think it's like a B, but I'm not like that excited by the prospect. Necro Dominance. So black, legendary enchantment. You skip your draw step. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay any amount of life, draw that many cards, and your maximum hand size is 5. Also, if a card or token would be put in your graveyard, exile it instead. I mean, this is just worse than Necropotence, right?
Yeah, it doesn't seem that good to me. Like, a lot of the times when you would Necropotence and go off, it would be about building up a critical mass of cards in your hand to take advantage of this. It's really much more of like a Phyrexian Arena for like black aggro decks, where you just kind of will always have like multiple cards to play every turn of the game. Taking a turn off from that is not the best.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of like a somewhat safer Necropotence, but Necropotence also we could just put in the cube and we don't, so looks like an F to me. Spymaster's Vault. This is the black version of the card that enters tapped unless you control a swamp. And you can pay a black and tap it. Target creature you control connives X, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn. So that's draw X, discard X. Gets a counter for each creature, or for each non-land card discarded this way. It's like a Rafine. Yeah, I mean, sure, I would put this in my black decks. I don't know if I'm going to put this in the cube. I'm probably not going to.
Yeah, you'd want to have something you could do more reliably. Like, a bunch of creatures. I have something in play. What?
The Bloodghast thing, the Bloodghast Sacrifice, Stitcher Supplier, Yawgmoth sort of deal. That's kind of like what we're talking about here. But until that happens, I don't think I want to add this, which still makes it a C. And like I said, any of the cards in the cycle you could plausibly put in and they would see play. I don't know if they're a good use of a cube slot. The Necrobloom. It's 1 plus Obzon mana, white, green, black, for a 2/7 legendary plant. It has landfall, make an 0/1 plant. But like Field of the Dead, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you make a 2/2 zombie instead of an 0/1 plant. And lands in your graveyard have Dredge 2, so you can always return a land instead of drawing a card. I think the cost on this probably makes it a little too prohibitive. I don't know. It's kind of cute. Play this, play a fetch land, get 2 things, but unless you have 7 lands and play, getting 2 0/1s isn't that great, and giving all your lands Dredge isn't that great either.
Yeah, it's not often you want to be white for these kind of decks in cube.
Yeah, I would say this is an F. I just don't think we're getting there. Nethergoyf's kind of interesting. It's black for an 0/1 with power equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard and toughness equal to that +1. So it's a Tarmogoyf that only looks at your graveyard. But it also has escape, so you can pay 2 and a black, and you can exile up to 4 types of cards to play it. So that usually means that you're going to exile 4 cards, but I guess if you have like an artifact creature, that counts for 2 of the types. It is rough that you can't just exile 4 lands. Like, you have to have 4 or more card types among those.
And then it's shrinking itself a ton.
That is usually the joke, is that when you escape it, it gets smaller. So I think that Nethergoyf would, again, fall into this C level of like, is there a self-mill deck? Because any cube that has Hogak probably wants this card in it. You know, if you're supporting that, you'll support this. But I don't think Nethergoyf makes it into like a normal cube under those circumstances. Pinnacle Monk is another one of the double face lands. It's 3 red for a 2/2 prowess. When it enters the battlefield, you get back an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and it's a red land that can enter untapped at the cost of 3 life. This one's pretty sweet. Like, I could definitely see wanting this in like a blue-red spells deck, or even just like a mono-reddish deck that has a couple of good spells to bring back, because paying 3 life for a land isn't the worst. And it's a little bit of an interesting card. It's a 2/2 prowess, does something in play, gets a spell back. I'd be open to trying this one.
This is a pretty sick card with Fire Blast.
Yeah, Fire Blast stock has risen. I think that Fire Blast is going to make it back in alongside all these. I mean, the Moto Cube never even cut it, and I think I'm with them on that one. I'm gonna get that Fire Blast right back in there. Pinnacle Monk looks like a B. Disciple of Freyalise is another one of the double-faced cards. It's 3 green for a 3/3. And when ETBs, you can sacrifice another creature. You gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. This is nice. You going to play this in your sneak decks?
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
I mean, pretty good with Bloodborne
probably.
Tyrant. Pretty
Really
good with like
good with
Bristlebud
Bloodborne
Farmer too. Like, just casting this, gain 5, draw 5 off one of your idiots, and it's a land if you don't need the effect. I don't hate this one. This one seems like it's got the upside to it.
Which one do you like better, this or your fight card?
This looks more interesting for sure. So maybe the fight card doesn't make it in. I would give this a B though. I like the double face cards that are interesting, not just, oh, I'll play this for incremental value. So this lands more into that camp. Dreamtide Whale's a funny one. It's 2 and a blue for a 7/5 whale. It doesn't have flying or anything. It's just a whale, though the art makes it look like it has flying. It has Vanishing 2, but whenever a player casts their second spell in a turn, proliferate, so you keep upping the vanishing counters to keep it around. I'm kind of into this. Like, can you imagine this in like a blue-red aggro deck that just has a lot of cheap cards in it? Seems kind of nice, right?
Yeah, it is. I think the one thing that makes me a little skeptical of it is, yeah, it's big, and you're kind of trading the bigness for the fact that it has no sort of protection or ETB ability. Yeah. And I don't know if a blue deck is actually wanting to make that trade too often.
How often would you rather have a Kite Sail Larcenist or a Trinket Mage or something like that instead, right?
Or a Cryptic Code or a True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, the 3-drop slot's pretty contested. My guess is this is D, just a worse version of existing things, but it's kind of cute. It's the blue Regisaur.
Yeah, it starts getting pretty exciting if the proliferate is mattering for things other than its own vanishing counters.
Right, but that I don't think is that likely to be the case. Grim Servant is a 3 and a black for a 3/2 menace. It's a zombie warlock, and when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a card with mana value equal to or less than your devotion to black. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and you lose 3 life. It's not optional, by the way. You're losing 3 life when you're casting this. It can always get a card that costs 1 or less, assuming this is in play when its trigger resolves. Your opponent could kill it in response. You could also always get a land or a 0, even if this dies. And then if you have anything else in play, it gets you something kind of big or like a little more expensive. This seems pretty good. I don't know. It's not great, but it seems 4 mana, 3/2 menace. Lose 3 life is a pretty big cost. Without that, I'd be a lot higher on the card. Getting a duress or something, getting a 2 mana spell, getting maybe at some point in the game a 3 or 4 mana spell. Probably at 4, this is a worse version of existing things. Like, I could definitely see cutting Hostile Investigator for this. They're both very similar cards. Which one's better? I don't know. Hostile Investigator is probably a little bit better, but you never know. I could see matchups where this is better.
Yeah, my guess is this is better as us in unfair decks than fair decks, because I think the life loss just makes the value that you're getting, and only being a 3/2 is just, that package is just not enough. And so in unfair decks, you might reliably be able to get maybe a missing combo piece,
something like
LED, Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze. I would like playing this card in those decks, but that's not every deck.
I think this is a B. I don't know if I'm going to play it, but I think it would fall into the B category. Null Drifter is a 7 mana 4/4 flying. When you cast it, you draw 2 cards. It's Annihilator 1, which is kind of cute, but it also has Evoke, 2 and a blue. I don't think this is good enough because we're just not set up to take advantage of the 7 mana cost. Mole Drifter has been out of the cube for quite some time at this point, so I don't think evoking this is that great. It's a little bit better to Shallow Grave or something like that. But, oh no, you don't even draw 2 cards when you Shallow Grave it. Yeah, no,
Right.
I think that this is a C. If you wanted the Eldrazi package, it looks like a great addition, but without getting those extra synergies in, I don't think Null Drifter makes it.
There's one combo that's really, really exciting and cool with Null Drifter that I want to mention. And it's you go end of turn dress down and then on your turn, you still get the cast trigger because dress down hasn't applied yet. And then it comes into play and the evoke trigger doesn't happen.
That is a great combo. I do like that. So something to keep in mind. Haragast is an Erupting Hulk Nullkite. It's 9 mana, 6/6. It's got Emerge 6 red. So you can sack a creature to make it cheaper. And when you cast it, you can exile your hand. If you do, you draw 3 cards. It has flying. And each creature spell you has Emerge equal to its mana cost. Okay. So you're sacking a 4 mana card. So if you sack a 4 mana card, you play this for 4 mana, and then you exile your hand and draw 3, and you can then sack creatures to play other creatures. This looks a little like Bedlam Reveler to me, which is like there is a dream there. You could imagine a game or circumstance where it works. Most of the time, it's not going to work. It's kind of how I feel about this card.
Yeah, you just don't. It's not reliable enough that you can have a 3 or 4 drop in play that you want to sack to this, and that your hand is empty enough that the cast ability is strong. Like you do want to be using the cast ability. So I think the whole package it will have spots of being good, but we can get a little bit less more reliably for a similar amount of mana, I would say.
Looks like a D, I think. This is the front side of Ral. So this is 1 and a red for Ral Monsoon Mage. It's a legendary human wizard. Your instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell during your turn, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Ral deals 1 damage to you. If you win the flip, you can exile him and transform him into Ral, which actually I'll just go back since it's not that far away. The Leyline Prodigy. So it's 2 loyalty, enters with an additional loyalty counter for each instant or sorcery spell you've cast this turn, and until it has a +1, all your spells cost 1 less to cast until your next turn. -2, deal 2 damage, divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets, and you draw a card if you have another blue permanent other than Ral. -8, exile the top 8 cards, and you can cast all the instants and sorceries among those cards for free. So if you play this and you play like 2 spells, it'll come before you win the flip. And you can also choose not to transform Ral if you want to like juice him up. If you're going to play, let's say you had a turn where you were going to play 4 instants in the same turn, you could choose to not flip him on the first couple and then start to take a gamble that you'll flip him on the 3rd or 4th. Obviously, that could go wrong.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Though, if they're all instants, what you could do is you could cast them all in response to each other and then just flip him on the first one. The first time you win the flip.
Oh, I guess, yeah, you kind of do want to play it that way, huh?
If it's sorceries, you can't necessarily do that. But you could, if you have an instant and a sorcery, you could cast the sorcery in response, cast the instant, and then just flip him on the first flip, and he'll see the 2 spells. In any case, let's say you start out with minimum 3 loyalty, because you have to. You -2 Ral, and you cast fire. You get to cast fire and ice, kind of, if you have another blue permanent. You get up to 8. I guess the joke here is that maybe because he makes the spells cheaper, you can cast 6 spells in the same turn, flip him immediately with 8 loyalty, and just immediately ultimate.
Interesting. You
don't
don't have to pay the mana cost.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a 2 mana 1/4 is going to be that interesting. So, 1/3, sorry. So, I think this looks like a D. Like, it looks like a better version of Baral, but Baral hasn't been in the cube for a long time.
Until we add it back.
Or Goblin Electromancer. I don't know, the -2 is just okay, the +1's just okay. This looks like a little bit too much work for me.
Yeah.
Next, we have Grist, Voracious Larva. So it's green for a 1/2 Death Touch. Kind of a nice start. And whenever Grist or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your library, you can pay a green. And if you do, you transform Grist into whatever Grist is. The
The Plague Swarm.
It's a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You can +1, make a 1/1, and if you mill 2 cards, and if you mill a black card, the token has Death Touch. -2, destroy an artifact or enchantment. -6, you copy your whole graveyard of creatures except their 1/1 insects. So, green for a 1/2 Death Touch is not a blank. It's a better than Ral, for example. I think like a 1/3. I mean, a 1/3 that makes your spells cheaper is just okay. I guess a 1/2 Death Touch is just okay, but it has a little bit more effect on the board. If you're playing cards out of your graveyard or your library, you can flip it into a disenchant or make a 1/1 and plus mill. I'm not really seeing it on Grist here. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for this card to be good, you would need to have a lot more cards in the cube that rewarded you for milling and were like able to come out of the graveyard at very low cost. If you got to that point, yeah, Grist sounds like a great little engine card, but I would put it in the C category for that reason.
Yeah,
most of its rate is tied up in things that aren't in the cube.
It goes really well with Bloodghast. Glimpse the Impossible is 2 and a red sorcery. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. You can play those this turn. But at the beginning of the next end step, if you didn't play any of those cards, if for each card you didn't play, you put it into your graveyard and make a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that sacks for a mana. This is kind of cool because you either, like at the very least, you can play 3 mana for 3 Eldrazi spawn. And the cards go to your graveyard, so it stocks your graveyard after all. And you can play any number of them that you want to play, that you do have to spend the mana. I don't think I play this card very often. It's kind of nice in like a big red deck. I could see it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the ritual part is potentially pretty interesting, right? Like, this is kind of a lot of a seething song.
I mean, you get with 3 tokens that can chump and then next turn sack for mana, so.
But you do have to wait a full turn cycle to get your ritual, so even in that case, there's still some downside, and it is only colorless mana.
Yeah, but in the late game with a lot of mana, your ritual does draw you cards. So I think it's a D, but I think it's kind of interesting. Creation of Avacyn is a saga. It's 1 black. Chapter 1, search your library for a card, exile it face down. Chapter 2, turn the exiled card face up. It still remains exiled. If it's a creature, you lose life equal to its mana value. Chapter 3, you can put the exiled card onto the battlefield if it's a creature, or into your hand if it's not. I mean, this card looks bonkers.
Like, it looks pretty dope, yeah.
I mean, turn 3, you cast this, you search for, let's say Atroxa. Turn 4, you lose 7 life. Turn 5, you just have an Atroxa in play.
Yeah, really good for spell combo decks because it's just basically like a 3-mana demonic tutor with suspend. But maybe that's not really good.
It's got suspend, but it also protects your card from discard. There's nothing I can do about it. Like you go search for your Yawgmoth's Will or your Underworld Breach. It's just sitting there in exile, waiting for you to kind of gear up to cast it. Also, this card works really well with acceleration. Like, imagine you have this in your opening hand with Dark Ritual. Very unlikely that your opponent can punish your life total enough that they could stop you from just getting, like, Vaultborn Tyrant, Really good with that card. I think this card looks like it's somewhere between A and S. I don't know. It looks pretty good to me. Like, maybe it's a little too slow. Maybe it's probably... Yeah, it can't be S tier if it takes 3 turns to work.
I think you're also, it can't be that high just because it is a devastatingly bad thing that happens to you if you spend 3 mana, lose 7 life, and then this gets blown up by
that's true. That's
Commando.
True. All right.
I would put this in B.
This is a B. I got a little ahead of my skis, but but it does look pretty strong. I'm going to try it. Collective Resistance is green and 1 for an instant with Escalate Green. So you choose 1 or more, and you can pay a green to get more choices, but it's not like Spree. You get the first one for free, basically. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So it's a disenchant that also lets you cast it. You can't destroy multiple artifacts, but you could destroy an artifact and an enchantment. And what looks kind of nice is like, they try to kill your creature, you're like, give it hexproof and blow up your Mox, that sort of thing for 3 mana. So yeah. This looks marginal to me. Looks like a D, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of different disenchants with various upsides we could be playing with.
Quest for the Necropolis is black for an enchantment. It has landfall, put a counter on it. And you can pay 6 and sack it, put a creature from the graveyard on the battlefield under your control, but it costs 1 less to activate for each quest counter on it. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're getting a 2 mana Zombify if you've gotten the full 5 counters, but it's a little bit expensive if you don't. I guess the upside on this, Julie, chill out. The dog's getting restless. I guess Julie, we buy her a perfectly good dog bed. She just spends all her time just rummaging in it. All right, dog. Yeah, look at her. She looks very guilty. But if you don't have the time to landfall it, you might have the mana to just do it. And if you do have the time, it becomes a pretty significant savings. I think this is probably too narrow, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you are getting a reanimation effect that, like it's not like a Animate Dead or Necromancy they can blow up. Well, I guess actually they kind of can. Yeah, that's a bad example. I was gonna say, once you actually do the thing, they can't blow it up. You don't have to pay the life. It does hit both graveyards. That'll be relevant.
True.
I would be interested to try this, but I would guess this is closer to D than B.
I mean, casting this on turn 1, especially if you weren't going to do anything else that turn, and then getting a couple landfalls, especially with like maybe a fetch land thrown in, it turns into Animate Dead pretty quickly. Yeah, that worth trying. I'm tentatively good. Curse Mirror. This is another reprint. It's 2 and a red for an artifact that taps for a red, but as it enters the battlefield, you can make it a copy of any creature. So it's kind of an interesting mana dork / clone thing. It's only until end of turn, but it does give it a nice ETB. Good with Mishra's Workshop. I can see this card, making it in, even though we haven't played it so far. Imsker Iron Eater is 6 black-red for a 5/5 legendary demon. Has affinity for artifacts. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is half the number of artifacts you control rounded down. So if you cast this with 3 artifacts in play, you draw 1 card and lose 1 life, and it costs 5 mana. And you can pay 3 and a red and sack an artifact to deal damage equal to the sacrifice artifact's mana value to any target. So if you have 6 artifacts in play, this is a 2 mana 5/5 draw 3 lose 3. Pretty sick. If you have 4 in play, it's like a 4 mana play that draws 2 lose 2. I think this is going to be in the C category of if you supported black-red artifacts, and you had the Cranial Ram and stuff like that, this card would definitely go in. As it currently stands, I don't think it's quite there. All right, Wheel of Potential. 2 and a red sorcery. You get 3 energy counters, then you can pay X energy. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards, but if X is 7 or more, you can play cards you own exiled this way until the end of your next turn. Note, not for free. This card, I think, is definitely in the C category. You just would need to have energy before you'd want this card around, I think. Because 3 mana, exile your hand, draw 3 is just not that good of a card.
Yeah, it just doesn't do enough. It's you and the fact that you can sometimes really help your opponents in ways that's annoying is if it was only one-sided, I could see this being good enough. 3 mana for red, a very low curve red deck, but yeah.
Chthonian Nightmare is 1 and a black enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy counters. You can pay X energy, sack it, and return this to your hand to get back a creature with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield as a sorcery. So it's a recurring nightmare that only costs 2 instead of 3, but you have to pay energy. It gives you 3 every time, though. I think this...
So you can kind of bank some energy as you go through it.
Yeah, so if you use this and spend 1 energy to get a 1-drop back, you netted 2 energy and you can build it up. But I think this is still not going to be good enough without energy, because you really want to be able to play this and get back a 5-drop right away, and it just can't do that.
Yeah.
Ghostfire Slice is 2 and a red for an instant. It's devoid. It deals 4 damage to any target, but it only costs 1 mana to cast if your opponent has a multicolored permanent. I mean, 3 mana deal 4 is not that far out of bounds. Like, Char was in the cube until pretty recently. And if they have a multicolored permanent, like, this kills almost any planeswalker. Because almost all, a lot of the planeswalkers in cube are multicolor. Nug's a territorial Kavu. Nug's your opponent for 4 for 1 mana. I think this is still probably in the D category of, it's... I don't know why you would pick this burn spell over others, but it's kind of interesting. Emperor of Bones. 1 and a black for a 2/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. You can spend 1 and a black to adapt 2, so it's to put 2+1/+1 counters on it, and you can only do that once. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, put a creature card exiled with Emperor of Bones onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it, which means you exile it if it leaves the battlefield. It gains haste sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. I like this card. Like, play this on 2, exile something, spend 2 mana, you got a pretty cheap 4/4. But you can also time it such that, like in the late game, for example, play this beginning of combat. Is adapt sorcery speed only?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I thought you could adapt your Terramanders at instant speed.
Yeah, I believe so. Okay, and so you get to have this work right away. You get to go play this, exile something big, and then immediately on beginning of combat, still before you attack, adapt the Emperor of Bones and slam your opponent with some giant creature, and you got a 4 mana 4/4 that also corpse dance something out of either graveyard. Yeah, and if you have other ways to put +1/+1 counters on, it also works pretty nicely too.
It's annoying that it doesn't work with some of the cards that Shallow Grave and Corpse Dance works with due to the timing restrictions. Like, there's no way to do the Emrakul kind of stuff with this.
Yeah, that is true, but it works pretty nicely just in a fair black deck. I think that you could just you would just put this card in any deck. I would say this is a solid B, and given the state of black 2-drops, like in cheap creatures, I could see this being a cube staple even. I mean, it's 2 mana for a 2/2 that just grows into a 4/4 and gets something back once. Like, that's just pretty strong.
Fnatic, and you get to mess with your opponent's graveyard shenanigans.
True, it gets to exile every turn. Fanatic of Ronus is 1 and a green for a 1/4, taps for a green. It also has Ferocious, so if you have a 4-power creature, you can tap it for 4 green. And it has Eternalize of 2 green, which means it comes back as a 4/4, and then you can start tapping it for 4 green.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the downside with 2-drop mana dorks is that they only have like a little bit of toughness and they die to all the red removal spells. That's not an issue here. And the Eternalize ability is great. I don't know. This looks pretty awesome to me.
I would be inclined to try Cutting Paradise Druid for this, and or something along those lines. Maybe Wall of Roots, whichever one of these. This looks a lot better than Wall of Roots to me, actually. So, I'm
the Eternalize ability is sick.
Yeah, just getting a rebuy on this is really nice, and if you mill it, it's good. So this looks like a B. I like Fanatic of Ronus. Monumental Henge is the white ETB unless you control tapped a plains land. It taps for a white, and you can pay 2 white and tap it. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you can reveal a historic card from among them, put in your hand. Put the rest in the bottom. So that's a legend, an artifact, or an enchantment. I don't know how often you would use this ability. It's kind of like Castle Ardenvale is not good enough for cube, I don't think. And this is like Castle Ardenvale exactly, except instead you get to draw a card. But it's only of a certain type of card. I think this card is a miss also.
Yeah, I don't think it's an F just because it's like the opportunity cost is relatively low, but this is not an exciting card.
No. Vexing Bauble. 1 mana for an artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So it counters Fury, Solitude, Pyrokinesis, Mox Emerald, any of those cards. And you can also pay 1 tap and sack it to draw a card. I mean, a cantrip artifact for 1 mana is going to be good enough to see play in decks that contain Tolarian Academy. I don't know that the average deck's going to want to play this. It hoses Force of Will and the Pitch Elementals and Power. I kind of like that it hoses cards that are good to hose. Like it's good against like unfair decks and cards. And because you can just cycle it from play, you're not paying a huge cost for this. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting card. I don't think it's like fantastic, but you could put it in the cube. I would be willing to try it.
Yeah.
Looks like a B. And Flare of Fortitude. This is our last card here. So this is 2 white. You can sack a non-token white creature to play it. Until end of turn, your life total can't change. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So it counters a wrath or keeps you alive for a turn. Kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like a Force of Will for in white that only works to protect your stuff. Like that's kind of the most common use case, I'd imagine. Like I just play a Hero of Bladehold, and then you go to spend your turn killing it, and then I counter it, and then you lose because of that.
Yeah, but you had to have played another creature ahead of time to protect the hero, I guess, in that sense. Or in that scenario, which can happen. How often would you main deck this in a white weenie deck? And just like a mono white, 17 creature deck?
4 mana is a lot for the just normal cast part. I would guess this is probably too narrow because you basically always have to be sacking something for it, but it could be better than I'm giving it credit for because maybe it incentivizes you to just be playing with bigger things. You play this with in a red white deck with a Bonehorde Dracosaur. I bet if you do that, you're gonna feel like you can't lose.
Yeah, protecting hero Bladehold's a good example. They go to kill your creature, you evoke Solitude, then sack the Solitude. that's a way to get a little bang for your buck. I think this probably doesn't quite make the cut, but again, this is the kind of card where if I wanted sideboard cards in the cube, this would be pretty high on the list. I just haven't gotten to that point yet. So looks like a D to me. Like, I don't know that this is better than various effects of this sort, but kind of interesting at least. And that brings us to the end of the review. I hope you enjoyed this 2-hour review of all the cards. There's going to be a lot of cards we want to try from the set. I'm going to have an interesting time fitting it all in here.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the commander cards from this set. So
no,
we'll see.
Let us know if you'd like to hear us chat on those. Otherwise, I mean, I'm sure I'll mention them at some point. And of course, they'll make it into the cube. But, it's the first time we've done a review like this. So we're all, of course, always open to feedback. All right. But before we go, of course, we've got the tier list here. I'll zoom in a little bit here. So we only have 2 S tier cards. We've got the Psychic Frog and Invert Polarity. I feel pretty good about both of those at S tier, I think.
Yeah, they're just able to win. I think when you're talking about S tier, we were looking for cards that can pretty clearly win games on their own.
And I think both of those cards definitely fall into it. They both, like, I just don't imagine passing the Frog, especially, like, very early. Like, that card looks really good. And for cube staples, what do we got?
We've got a Johnny, we've got Thalia, we've got Tamiyo, we've got the Crabomination, the new green Golos, Eldrazi, and the abstruse something or other. It's a little hard for me to even read the names on my screen, but it's the Fractured Identity and Orzhov,
the white-black exile. And I feel pretty good about these. The Crab looks powerful. Getting any land for 3 and a green looks powerful. Cradle stock, again, certainly risen. And I'm excited about the new addition for a black-white removal spell. And then white gets 2 new good 2-drops. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Certainly going to change the texture of some of the early white plays. With Tamiyo being also a really nice little blue value creature that I think is going to play pretty interestingly. A lot of options on that card.
Yeah. I feel pretty good about our A's. Out of those, I think I'm the most excited for the Orzhov card, for maybe even for Tamiyo, honestly. Yeah. Tamiyo just seems like a pretty nutty enabler for some things we like to do.
And then too many B's to go through all of them, but I want to call out that 6, even the version that can't play Swords to Plowshares from the graveyard, I think that one has like the most room to move up, but all of these look pretty solid, and this is a lot of cards to try. The way they design cards and sets these days, it feels like cube. I'm not saying they're designing for cube, but a lot of the things they do end up being pretty good in cube, and I'm curious to see how many end up sticking. I know for OTJ I added something like 26, 27 cards, and I want to say there's like 10 left maybe. So it'll be interesting to see what the washout rate is for Modern Horizons. And a big group of C's also that where if we were to change the cube up, some of these could definitely make the cut, but aren't doing so right now. And you know what? That'll do it for today. Only 2 hours. We're actually more than that. And as always, BK, I want to thank you for being on the channel. I know people have really enjoyed it, and hopefully you're having a good time too. We'll be back with more draft content, regularly scheduled as usual. And so I'll see you tomorrow for a cube draft. Let me know what you thought about this, how you think BK could improve on his part of it, the things I did great, and everything else. As always, it's a pleasure getting to do this and talk about cube, my favorite way to play Magic, bar none. So I will see you tomorrow, and continue to enjoy cubing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps out the channel, and you won't miss a single draft.